Greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, Robert Meyer Burnett, and I invite you to watch and listen to the Designing Hollywood podcast, brought to you by Martika Ibarra and the great, legendary Hollywood costume designer, Marilyn Vance. I am afforded the wonderful opportunity of co-hosting the show. If you are interested in the magic of Hollywood, the design of Hollywood, the clothes of Hollywood, watch the Designing Hollywood podcast, available wherever you get your podcasts from, or find the video version on YouTube. That's right, the Designing Hollywood podcast. Why would you ever want to miss it, especially if you love the movies?
Tango Shalom is now available on all VOD
major platforms. I think we messed that up.
Video on demand, or as they say in the trade, VOD.
VOD. Tango Shalom is now available on all VOD platforms,
which means
video on demand.
Look how you know. You must be a high school graduate.
I'm a college graduate.
Really?
Yes.
I got an honorary degree from Hofstra. Did you get an honorary degree?
No, I got a degree.
Oh, well, I got honorary. You know, I'm in the Jewish Museum.
What for?
What do you mean? As a famous Jew in the Bronx. I'm in the famous...
I'm in the Prospect Park in the Stones.
How big is the stone?
Robservations with Robert Meyer Burnett.
Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your master of fun and wonder, your viceroy of verisimilitude, your evangelist of the imagination, and of course, your existential Mr. Rogers. That's right, Robert Meyer Burnett. And I am Robcasting at you. You imagination connoisseurs, you members of this, the Post-Geek singularity community. You know, okay, I was looking for stories to do this morning for the Hollywood Half and Half, and there like weren't any when I got up at 6:30. I'm looking, there wasn't enough to do the show because the holiday weekend, of course, they all dropped between like 7:30 and 10 o'clock. I'm like, God, could have done it. Don't worry, I'll be back tomorrow. Everyone's like, are you okay? I'm like, yeah, man. I was just looking for stories, and I was frustrated because there weren't any, and then they all just dropped. So I apologize for that. But anyway, so I read this article over the weekend. First of all, I have found the response to Ghostbusters Afterlife to be interesting online. A lot of people love it. And then I watched Red Letter Media's review of it. And for those of you who don't know, I've been a huge fan of Red Letter Media since the very first time I saw their review, Mr. Plinkett's review of Star Trek Generations. What, about 10 years ago? Maybe? This was before they even did their seminal eviscerations of the Star Wars prequel movies. But they did the Star Trek films. They did the Next Generation Trek films. And I'm like, I don't know who these dudes are, but they are definitely kindred spirits. And Mike and the gang, big fans of them. And I watched their Ghostbusters Afterlife review, and I was surprised. I don't think it was so much vitriol as it was, well, they do eviscerate the movie, but in an interesting sort of a way. And I've been thinking a lot about, obviously, the idea of nostalgia and the fact that I'm currently trying to get a few projects off the ground, new film projects that they're original IPs. They've got no roots in anything anyone's ever seen before. And it's very difficult. It's really hard right now to get anybody at the studios or at production companies or anything to want to make something that they don't know, because it's a risk. You know, you might like a story, you might like a script, but it doesn't mean that the filmmakers that will eventually go make that script, or the money people that have the money, there's no guarantee that you can get something made that will turn out well enough that it could be kind of a hit. And that's when it comes do you believe whether or not that the people that are behind this project, can they pull it off? And there's a couple of projects I have that I'm working on with a few people, and I think they're all, I would get behind them. I would greenlight all of the projects because I already know my abilities, but you can't. Someone says to you, okay, well, Rob, let me look at your last piece of work. And I've got, the things you can look at now. Tango Shalom is obviously out there. I edited the film, obviously produced the film. I was the post supervisor and the visual effects supervisor. But the thing is, that was a movie that cost, it was a very, very low budget movie. And the projects that I'm looking to find money for are substantially more expensive than Tango Shalom. And it's really hard to say, okay, look at Tango Shalom. Well, how do you look at Tango Shalom and think that, okay, this crazy, fantastical horror fantasy that's laden with special effects and is much more expensive, how are we supposed to reconcile? How do we trust you, Rob? Tango Shalom does not show us that you can make this thing. And this is not thinking that I don't disagree with them. But the thing is, to me, a great story is a great story. If you like the material, the question is, can people execute? Can they execute favorably? And the projects that I have, some of them are much more easier sells than others. The one I want to do the most, though, is relatively outlandish, and I've wanted to make it for a long time. And a lot of people read it and go, "Well, this is cool, but I don't know if you can pull this off." I know that I can, but I constantly am told or asked, "Well, isn't there an IP that you might you're interested in maybe attacking?" There are, I've tried. But then again, there are IPs that people don't know. There is Bill Hunt and I worked up a pitch for a reboot of Jerry Anderson's TV series UFO. Well, no one knows UFO. It was 1969 to 71. It later was morphed. Its second season basically became Space 1999. And we wrote basically a Bible about how do you reboot UFO. And it wasn't going to be a reinvention of it, but it was going to be a continuation. So the UFO as portrayed in the series, which took place in 1980, and then there were flashbacks throughout the 70s, in our pitch, that existed. The show existed, and now our pitch took place sort of in the near future from now toward the latter half of the 2020s. But even the people that they liked our pitch, but they don't know the original show, so no one was really excited about it. It's a very weird place to be. But I've been reading a lot about nostalgia and IP and what do I believe or what do I think? And the problem is Hollywood is incredibly risk averse. The movies that the studios are making now, they're expecting to spend at least $100 million and make $1 billion. I mean, that's really, forget the pandemic. Just take that out of the equation. But that would be the traditional thinking. Well, no one's going to greenlight a movie for $100 million plus dollars, $150 million. I mean, Star Wars can always get that. The Marvel Cinematic Universe can get that because they're proven commodities. But if you're trying to make an original movie, no one at a studio is going to spend $150 million on a movie that they've never heard of unless they have elements that make it as bulletproof as possible, meaning A-list director, A-list screenwriter, A-list actors, so they can say, okay, this might be something new that we're rolling the dice on, but the talent involved is impeccable, unimpeachable in terms of who they are and what they can do. And it's just a weird time. Like you either work at the $2 million or less mode, which is where Tango Shalom lived, substantially less than $2 million, or you try and broaden your horizons. But it's a really hard thing to do. You can't do it. So the movies that we're getting, a lot of them are steeped in nostalgia. But what's unfortunate is that, in a way, if you're going to go back and look at a franchise like Ghostbusters was definitely a product of its time. When it came out in 1984, Ghostbusters was a high-concept comedy, but it relied upon our known comedic properties at the time. Bill Murray, he'd been on Saturday Night Live. He'd made movies like Meatballs and Caddyshack. Harold Ramis was all part of that same crew. So was Dan Aykroyd. I mean, Blues Brothers, those kinds of things. So you already had a group of known comedians, and they had their comedy stylings, and they made Ghostbusters, which is a high concept. What if these academic schlubs want to try and fight ghosts, because ghosts are real? You knew right away that, okay, we're going to make this movie. And you've got Ivan Reitman, who was at the peak of his powers at that time. And so Ghostbusters was a good bet. You had Richard Edlund doing special effects in 65 millimeter. So it was a great combination of elements. But what's funny about Ghostbusters, it's also a movie that is inherently about New York City, and it plays off ideas of things in The Exorcist, like possession, and there's all of these things that Ghostbusters was a sort of unique, frothy, heady concoction, very much of its time and of the talent that was working on it. So now we have Ghostbusters Afterlife, which is a follow-up to the original Ghostbusters and Ghostbusters 2. And it's not, now Ghostbusters 2016, the all-female Ghostbusters, which has been much maligned. I think it's a better movie than it ever gets credit for, but it's the fan backlash around it. It does have elements. It is set in New York. It is kind of got that snarky comedy. I think the tone of it was a little off, but I understand I don't think it's the trash fire that a lot of people make it out to be. But anyway, so Jason Reitman, son of Ivan Reitman, came back to do Ghostbusters Afterlife. And Ghostbusters Afterlife I find to be a very interesting film. I thought it was an interesting movie. I liked it, but I kind of have to agree with Red Letter Media and a lot of the detractors of the film. I think on one hand, it is a good movie. I don't think it's a great movie, but I thought it was interesting in the way it approached what Ghostbusters was. And I felt that it was a movie that was made more for the people watching it than it was as a film unto itself, if that makes any sense. Because it's an interesting follow-up to Ghostbusters, but it's more about Ghostbusters fandom, even though it had a interesting, solid story. I just felt like I was watching a very strange hybrid of a movie. And then I read this article in the BBC that I'm going to share with you now. This BBC article, Ghostbusters Afterlife is nostalgia killing cinema. And this was written by Jack King, and it was published on November 18th. That Hollywood is becoming lazier and artistry, that Hollywood is becoming lazier and artistry ever more sacrificed for maximum profitability is an often heard refrain. In 2019, all of the top 10 highest grossing films at the U.S. box office were based on existing intellectual properties. Just 2 decades ago, it was 5. In a lot of cases, these big grossers, be they remakes of, spin-offs from, or long-awaited sequels to classics, play on one emotion in particular: nostalgia. They offer audiences the pleasure of past cinematic experiences and the comfort of ensconcing themselves in something familiar. But if such cinema is inherently designed to be reassuring, it is also divisive. The polarized reaction to the latest film in the Ghostbusters franchise, Ghostbusters Afterlife, released in cinemas in the UK and US today, exemplifies the debate that the servicing or as some would have it, exploitation of audiences' nostalgia can inspire. On the one hand, Empire Magazine's Ollie Richards praised the film, above all, for capturing the essence of the original. It's not quite the same as the Ghostbusters we know, but it entirely feels like Ghostbusters. And on the other, The Guardian's Charles Bramesco offered a particularly damning appraisal of it as a work that is content to trade off the original and assume that the automatic delight of knowing what things are will supersede the need for the humor or smart-ass charm that initially made Ghostbusters worth watching. The film follows the daughter and grandkids of original Ghostbuster Egon Spengler, the late Harold Ramis, as they relocate to his remote farmhouse on the outskirts of golden-lit, corn-fed Americana after being evicted from their New York home. It just so happens to be located on top of a hotbed of supernatural activity, disturbed by quakes thought to be caused by fault lines, but of course something altogether more sinister is at play. Directed by Jason Reitman, the son of original Ghostbusters 1984 director Ivan, it mostly feels well-meaning. There are myriad shots homaged, some quite cleverly, from his father's film, and it brims with recognizable Easter eggs for franchise fans. Foreboding baritone references to the baddie called Zul. For example, the Ghostbusters' iconic vehicle Ecto-1 shrieks with its quintessential siren, their ghost-busting proton packs cross streams, and even the cutie villainous Stay Puft Marshmallow Man makes a return, albeit in a much smaller form. And of course, there's the much speculated upon and yet hardly surprising return of some familiar faces, including one, more surprisingly, who returns as a silent CGI ghost in a move that raises many ethical concerns around reanimating dead performers for the capital gains of studios. This is a Frankenstein business where we really need to take a step back and think about where this technology goes. Bremesco tells BBC Culture, "This is so clearly an ethical violation of the rights of dead people. It starts off with corporate cheerleading, but where does it go from there?" The queasiness of that appearance aside, the film arguably doesn't have much to offer in and of itself, separate from its reference to its predecessors. That's because it doesn't have any tangible reality of its own. Now, this is where I really got interested in this article, because it touches on something that I've thought of. I think about this about Star Trek all the time, but a lot of the movies and the IPs that we've been getting that are reboots, reimaginings, regurgitations of previous IP, this is very interesting. That's because it doesn't have any tangible reality of its own. Its backwards-looking stance extends beyond the details to encompass the film's whole mood. Despite it notionally being set in the present day, Somerville, the film's remote rural town, is itself a time capsule. A neon-lit, drive-in diner being its central attraction. As Alison Wilmore wrote in her review for Vulture, Afterlife is assiduously apolitical in its content. Yet it also instinctively understands the pop culture nostalgia it's peddling is of a kind that desire to restore some fabled idyllic period that haunts national discourse. It also instinctively understands that nostalgia is popular culture's most valuable commodity right now, which might explain its decision to ape the market leader, in this respect, Netflix series Stranger Things. Among other things, Afterlife refocuses the story on a group of adolescents in an imagined slice of corn-fed Americana and casts Stranger Things star Finn Wolfhard. Stranger Things is a show in the thrall to 80s film references, the original Ghostbusters movies being among them. The fact that the new Ghostbusters then feels the need to evoke it in turn, the copy of the copy, makes its nostalgia feel that much more contrived, not to mention convoluted. Now, it's interesting because I keep coming back to the idea myself of Cobra Kai. Cobra Kai is a show that I can't believe it exists. I can't believe that somebody decided to go back and do a Cobra Kai series based on the Karate Kid series of films. And who would have thought it's as good as it is? What I find really interesting about Cobra Kai is, they're doing all the deep dives they can into Karate Kid lore, if there's such a thing. And they keep promising more. But the really interesting thing about Cobra Kai is, at its core, it tells a new, very relevant story, a story that is removed from simply being a Karate Kid remake or a reboot or a shameless recreation. It's not that. It actually has a really interesting story about where do people that might have had past glories in their lives, or maybe their adult lives weren't what they expected them to be. And Cobra Kai does a really good job of literally finding characters that we knew once before and reorienting them 30 years or 35 years later, and telling a story about what does it mean to grow older? What does it mean to maybe have to deal with the fact that your life didn't turn out to be the same or what you'd hoped? There's a real, genuine story that's happening in Cobra Kai that is not about the original series or the original series of films. It's actually a genuine story that anybody, if you've never seen Karate Kid or you don't know about its ties to these other films, it still works. And it works like gangbusters because it is not, sure, the way in, the gimmick is the nostalgia that, yes, okay, remember Karate Kid? Well, we're gonna show you these characters, but that was only a jumping off point. And it's really interesting to see where they've gone. Whereas other things, like Ghostbusters Afterlife, are doing something that's different. It's a different kind of a movie. And the snarky humor and things like that were sort of, I feel like this is such an earnest film. It's a Spielbergian attempt, but does it have the essence of what Ghostbusters is? I don't know. Anyway, the fact that the new Ghostbusters then feels the need to evoke it, meaning Stranger Things, in turn, the copy of a copy makes its nostalgia feel that much more contrived, not to mention convoluted. Those who are dispirited by these trips down memory lanes aren't going to find solace anytime soon. One recent development is that the studios and conglomerates are making their modus operandi to build up their content libraries with shows and films based on classic titles that inspire nostalgic consumer recognition. Paramount's streaming platform Paramount Plus has a series based on Love Story, The Parallax View, The Italian Job, Fatal Attraction, and Grease in the works, for example. Meanwhile, Disney Plus has been remaking and rebooting everything from The Mighty Ducks to Turner and Hooch and latterly Home Alone. Released last week to a host of terrible reviews, Home Sweet Home Alone showed how pandering to nostalgia can end up serving no one very well, neither new audiences nor old ones. It all comes back to the question of why the film was made in the first place, as Radio Times' Patrick Cremona puts it. It's certainly not for kids, who I can't imagine enjoying much about this. No, it's pretty clear that the target audience is for the adults who retain a nostalgic fondness for the original Home Alone, which explains why there are several clumsy references to the film throughout, including a cameo from Devin Rattray as Buzz McAllister. But regrettably, I imagine even the most hardcore fans of that film will struggle to find much to enjoy in this turkey. This kind of cultural reproduction is nothing new. In a 2016 article for The Atlantic, film academics Amanda Ann Klein and R. Burton Palmer argued that cinema has always been rooted in the idea of multiplicities, that is, in texts that consciously repeat and exploit images, narratives, or characters found in previous texts. But if this retrospective inclination has always been present within the film industry, some would argue that it has turned pathological. The complaint that Hollywood is making too many sequels, too many remakes, drawing from a dry creative well, that is not a particularly recent development. The history of Hollywood is the history of studios repeating their successes, Bramesco says, but I think that the nostalgia-driven cinema kicked into high gear into this inescapable weekly thing with the beginning of the Disney remake renaissance. The renaissance in question refers to the studio's mining of its extensive animated back catalog for a second box office hit by rendering them into a series of live-action remakes with appeal for both children, potentially coming to them fresh, and their parents, who grew up on the originals and can enjoy a remainder of their own childhoods. Bramesco cites Tim Burton's Alice in Wonderland from 2010 as the real beginning of this so-called renaissance. It wasn't actually the first live-action remake of a canonized Disney cartoon, lest we forget Stephen Sommers' 1994 adaptation of The Jungle Book and the subsequent 101 Dalmatians live-action films from 1996 and 2000. But Bramesco believes its movies, its billion-dollar global box office, conclusively asserted that there are some movies, regardless of what it is, how good it is, people will go see because it's based on something they remember. Who doesn't remember Alice in Wonderland? Subsequently, Disney's production of these live-action remakes and spin-offs has skyrocketed. Robert Stromberg's Maleficent came out in 2014, with 1 or 2 additional titles per year until 2019 brought with it 4. It has been a largely winning formula for Disney, with one of the aforementioned 2019 titles, The Lion King, albeit not live-action but rather photorealistic animation sold as real, raking in $1.65 billion at the global box office. And there's the rub. If it's easy to criticize the studio's appeal to nostalgia as cynical, then it's clear from the box office results that it's hitting the spot. And really, is there anything ignoble about fans' desire to be reminded of the things they love? The problem is, however, where does the nostalgia obsession end? Reitman, for example, has suggested that he would like to see Afterlife as the first in an expanded Ghostbusters universe. A post-credits scene in the film certainly signposts this intent, as did the formation of the Ghostbusters-specific production company, Ghost Corps, prior to the 2016 Ghostbusters reboot, which was dogged by misogynistic criticism of its all-women lead quartet, and has been casually stricken from the canon in Afterlife. From Marvel to Star Wars, shared story universes are, of course, very much in vogue. But until recently, the Ghostbusters universe was comprised, although it says compromised here, was comprised of two fun comedies set in the 80s, with a lewd ensemble of SNL alumnus. Arguably, it doesn't seem the most natural material for some grand interconnected saga. Equally, some have faith it could work. Part of me thinks, why has it taken so long, says editor of sci-fi magazine SFX and Ghostbusters fan Darren Scott. There's a new series based on the Child Play films called Chucky, which just hits the mark. It's fantastically queer, it's horrific, it's so cleverly done, you don't get the sense that they're being cynical about it, that they're out to get a quick buck. They're actually pouring love into it, not unlike Cobra Kai. And if Jason Reitman is going to pour love into Ghostbusters and do huge spin-offs and TV shows, then brilliant. But aside from assessing the quality of the franchise titles at hand, it feels as though there is a greater, more existential point for Hollywood cinema to contend with. The desire to appeal to nostalgic instincts is part of a bigger issue, that studios are seemingly becoming less and less likely to take a risk on films without existing brand recognition. Indeed, there is a real irony in the fact that much of this nostalgia-driven content is capitalizing on once original titles that simply wouldn't be made today. This summer's Free Guy, acquired by Disney with their controversial takeover of Fox, was the studio's first live-action release not based on an existing intellectual property in 3 years. Asked whether he thought a studio would bank on an original idea like Free Guy again, which relatedly has been lined up for a sequel, director Sean Levy said, "I'm going through a mental Rolodex of the studios, Sony, Warner's, Paramount, Disney, Lionsgate. The truth is those studios are predominantly, if not exclusively, betting big money on franchise titles. Someone referred to Free Guy as the last chopper out of Saigon, and I do think about that. I hope it's not the case. And even then, Free Guy itself is not free of nostalgia impulses. It's notionally based on video games like Grand Theft Auto, and its third act chucks out $40 billion worth of recognizable props from the Disney stable, a benefit of said takeover, from lightsabers to Captain America's shield. Recognition again seemingly being offered up as the great cinematic pleasure in itself. This is the debatable idea, that the overwhelming drive of mainstream Hollywood cinema is now to offer the dopamine hit of familiarity that leaves some critics so deflated. It's hard to not talk about this in apocalyptic end-of-history type language, Bramesco says. Not to get existential, but this makes me feel alienated from people, just realizing that my value system as art goes are not only removed from other people's, but almost diametrically opposed. While some might view the current nostalgia-fueled entertainment model as apocalyptic, others welcome it with open arms. I don't care how many times they remake Batman. I'll go and see every version of it, Scott says. That's a good thing about the sort of market that SFX speaks to. We love a thing, and we'll go see it. If we don't like the new version, that's fine. We'll go to the next one, too. We never let go of our childhood loves. But now I would ask you, dear viewers, our childhood loves were usually, for the most part, unique. We'd never seen them before. And even in my own lifetime, I think about movies that I thought were pretty astonishing experiences at the cinema. Jurassic Park. I remember seeing Jurassic Park for the first time back in the early 90s, and I was thinking to myself, wow, yeah, Spielberg directed it, and it was based on a Michael Crichton novel that was a big bestseller. But, seeing great literary adaptations has been something around my whole life. But what I thought was amazing about Jurassic Park was it was the very first time I'd ever seen photorealistic dinosaurs. I mean, I'm a kid that I couldn't wait if I saw on the TV guide that the Danish kaiju movie Reptilicus was playing, and Reptilicus is god-awful. I mean, if you really want to laugh your ass off, go onto YouTube and look up the trailer for Reptilicus. It was an Asylum movie before there was the Asylum. But I loved it. But seeing Jurassic Park and seeing photorealistic dinosaurs, that whole moment, taking off the glasses as the brachiosaur rears up and takes leaves off the trees, this was even in my, I was already an adult by this point, but I was like, wow. I couldn't believe what I was watching. Same was true in 1999 of the first Matrix. You know, usually I'm up on this stuff. I mean, this was pre where the internet put up every trailer and you could watch it 100,000 times. But still, I went to The Matrix and I'm like, my God. And it was a transcendent film. And of course, they had to roll out sequels and a video game and comic books and all that kind of stuff, which I get. Matrix was hugely cool. And I have to say, I don't know what Matrix Resurrections is about. I've heard it's really weird and meta. People have said that The Matrix is actually a movie that you can go see in the universe of Matrix Resurrections. And if that's true, I'm curious to see where Lana Wachowski is taking it all, because, hey, I'm there for it. But even I recognize that, you know, the last two Matrix movies are certainly not the greatest movies because they're all over the place. Whereas the first Matrix was very, very focused. And it worked out really well. And I do get excited to see these movies because if I liked it, if I liked the world of the Matrix, in my mind, I'm like, there's a lot of places that this can go. But I always go back, as I always do, go back to Star Trek. You know, my beloved Star Trek as a franchise, up until recently, up until 2009, was a franchise that was either moving forward or it would go back in time and fill in gaps that we didn't know about yet. But it was new. Now, was Next Generation and Deep Space Nine, for the most part, pretty excellent? Yes. Was Voyager kind of a copy of a copy? Sure. Enterprise, very much hit and miss, but by the fourth season, it gave us what we wanted, a prequel series to the original series that laid out the universe. But now, since 2009, Star Trek has only moved backwards, you know, and it's giving us, we're going to get 2 shows in a time frame that is going to retcon half of what we know about the original series. And now, well, anyway, I won't make this about Star Trek, but it is getting tiresome. I am tired of seeing the same things rehashed over and over and over again. Studios aren't making, you know, I keep talking about, like, I loved movies like Predator, Die Hard, Hunt for Red October, all directed by one man, John McTiernan. But these were seminal films when they came out. We're still talking about the first Predator today. You put on Hunt for Red October, you realize, wow, this is what beefy studio filmmaking used to be like. We don't get that anymore. And I will say that Hunt for Red October was based on a very popular book by Tom Clancy. And but even books, you know, sometimes the last really great book adaptation that I remember seeing of a modern book, I read Girl Gone in one sitting, Gillian Flynn's book, when it came out, that David Fincher directed it. I loved it. It was an incredible adaptation of that book. Would a studio even make Gone Girl today? Probably be a 10-part show on Netflix. But anyway. Indeed, for most people, formative cinematic experiences, whatever their artistic merit, are hard to shake from the soul. And whether or not you find the glut of nostalgic project, can't even read. And whether or not you find the glut of nostalgic product agreeable, it manifestly speaks to a deeply held impulse towards the familiar. When we only have time to go to the movies a handful of times a year, after all, we'll likely spend our money on experiences we think we can trust. The nostalgia mill, even if it cannot maintain the momentum with which it currently spins, is unlikely to lose its grip anytime soon. But that might just be what audiences want. I gotta say, I disagree. I think we're all looking for, when we go to the movies or watch a show, we all want it. We want to be sitting in a theater. I mean, I think that's, I can't stress enough, when I was a kid, whether I saw Logan's Run or Star Wars or Superman the movie or Alien or Star Trek the Motion Picture or Back to the Future, Blade Runner, Tron, Poltergeist, Star Trek 2, The Thing, E.T., Conan the Barbarian, even horror films like Dawn of the Dead or Reanimator, Back to the Future, RoboCop. I mean, all of these movies that have passed over into the pantheon of classic genre cinema, they were all, for the most part, unique. I mean, I would say that Star Trek 2, even though it's a sequel to Star Trek the Motion Picture, was vastly different. And for me, who was a Star Trek fan, I got an entirely different kind of a movie that bared, other than the fact that it took place like Star Trek itself, which was an anthology show. Star Trek 2 was very different than Star Trek the Motion Picture. It was not a rehash. And then watching movies, I mean, certainly when Ridley Scott made Blade Runner, it couldn't have been further away from Alien, other than the fact they both took place in the future. Not anymore, though. Blade Runner now takes place in the past. But you know what I mean. And Ridley Scott has provided recently, I mean, even though The Martian is an adaptation of Andy Weir's book, I loved it. I thought The Martian might be one of my very favorite science fiction films of the last 20 years, especially the extended version. Of course, yes, it was based on an IP, and you had a great director like Ridley Scott making a movie with people like Jessica Chastain and, of course, Matt Damon. But it's a great film. And when I watched that movie, to me, that was powerhouse studio filmmaking. Beautifully realized. And it ticked all the boxes. And I want more of that, please. I want to go to the theater and see something that I can fall in love with again. I think we all do too, don't we? Isn't that what we want? Don't we want that to happen? I hope so. You know what I also wanted to happen? I wanted you to send me letters. And you did. I got a lot of letters, man. A lot of letters. So let's jump into them. Brian Knight writes, Rob, I would like to thank you for your simple solution to buying a Blu-ray player for Region B and DVD Region 2 movies. Just buy a British Blu-ray player from England and simply switch the HDMI cables into your television. I was looking for an all-in-one region-free Blu-ray DVD player, but with a little research, I discovered these multi-region players are actually US Region A1 players with their software hacked. This allows Region B and Region 2 Blu-ray and DVDs to be played. Unfortunately, this hack invalidates the warranty of these Blu-rays and DVD players and makes them impossible to return to the original manufacturer. Even if they accepted the Blu-ray and DVD players back, they would never send you the repaired multi-region player in return. Thanks for your assistance, Brian. Well, remember, if you plan on watching multi-region DVDs, you got to remember that multi-region DVDs are, of course, they're PAL. DVDs are PAL. So just be careful if you're going to do that. But yes, an elegant solution. Our friend Martino Sulmoni, who is a very generous supporter of this channel. Martino says, hello, Robert Meyer Burnett. Yesterday, I was visiting a construction site near the GoldenEye Dam, and I did a small detour to capture a couple of pics. Unfortunately, it was a foggy day. The clip is 30 seconds and 50 megabytes, or 80 megabytes at 1080p. I'd like to send it to you using Dropbox. Sorry for not being active lately. Too much work to bring home all the cars before the winter. Martina, will send it to me via Dropbox. I can send you a Dropbox link. This one comes from Sai, S-A-I. Hey, Rob, book reader of the Wheel of Time series here. I am loving this show. I know there were some pacing issues in the first episode, but the second and third episodes made me very happy. I hope you can get around to watching it sometime and hope to hear your thoughts. Thanks for everything you do. Sai. Well, Sai, I'm going to do that probably this next week. Got to jump into it. Elizabeth's been watching it and really liked it. And I told her to stop because I want to catch up. So I will be jumping in. Come on. I mean, Omar needs to know what I think. No, I mean, Omar, and so does, Omar doesn't need to know what I think. I'm almost got the next letter right here. Stubble McShave has to know what I think. This next one does come from Omar. Hi, Rob, moderators in the Post-Geek Singularity. 3 movie anniversaries are upon us, but only one of them holds the most importance. 2 movies celebrate 30 years. Beauty and the Beast and The Addams Family. They both came out on November 22nd, 1991. The other film is the Arnold Schwarzenegger comedy Jingle All the Way, which turns 25 and came out on November 22nd, 1996. The Addams Family and Jingle All the Way have become staples of television, with the former playing on TV all the time during October for Halloween, while the latter coming on TV all the time during the winter. Jingle All the Way did not join the top 10 highest-grossing films the year it came out, but both Addams Family and Beauty and the Beast did. Beauty and the Beast holds the most importance out of the 3 movies due to creating a landmark in film history, as it was the first animated movie to be nominated for Best Picture. It's also the only movie of the 3 I brought up to win Oscars, as it won for Best Original Score and Best Original Song. Thanks, and live long and prosper. That's from Omar. Omar, thank you for that. Always good to hear about those movie anniversaries. I forget. I mean, I leave, whenever I get your letters like that, I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Makes me feel old. There you go. David Miller. David Miller writes in, "Hey, Rob. Dave here. It's been a while since I've written in, and since that time, you've covered quite a few interesting topics on the show. I've been moved to comment on a lot of them, but time or lack thereof has deterred me. But I'd really like to comment on the article you read by Jerry Zucker about Airplane in general and the state of comedy writing in specific. First, it was a great article, one that made me laugh out loud more than once. And it made me aware that I haven't sought out a comedy film, whether streaming or in the theater, in a long time, which is a drag, because I love comedy, both watching it and trying to write it. Secondly, it made me wonder if Marvel movies haven't done to comedies and romance movies what Marvel Comics did to humor comics, romance comics, and Western comics. They subsumed them. Let me explain. In the old days of comics publishing, if you wanted comedic content, you read a humor comic. If you wanted a Western, you read a Western comic. If you wanted to read romance, you bought a romance comic. War stories, war comics. Likewise, horror. And if you wanted superhero fare, you bought a superhero comic. But then Stan Lee came along and the Marvel age of comics began. And it seemed like Stan would let other genres seep into the monthly slugfests. The heroes didn't just have girlfriends, but girlfriend problems, performing the functions of romance comics. The heroes didn't just find themselves in conflicts with adversaries, but conflicts with the absurd. Conflicts that could only be combated with humor. The heroes often left the comforting environs of New York City to find themselves on the battlefields of East Asia, replicating the experience of reading a war comic. Marvel Comics were devouring other genres and replacing them. And this could be said of the Marvel movies. Let's say you're considering seeing a comedy. You could think, well, Marvel movies are funny. Or if you want to see a rom-com, you can wonder, well, gee, will Steve ever get a girlfriend? Science fiction, I sure like those Guardians of the Galaxy movies. And so on and so on. It's one-stop shopping. Are Marvel movies making other genres redundant? Or do those genres just need to step up their game? Or am I totally misreading the situation? I'd like to get your take on this supposition, Rob, especially since you've just finished a very genre-specific film with a very specific audience. Well, that's it. I know I didn't really give the Zucker article the attention it deserves. Zucker made a lot of great points about writing comedy in the current landscape or minefield, and I don't think I can add anything to what he said, and I certainly couldn't be any funnier than he was. Well, take care. I really do hope to go out to the cinema in the near future to see a really funny movie that I can quote for weeks. That comes from David Miller. I think it's a good point. You know, what I find strange about the modern age that we live in, whether it was movies, books, albums, whatever it was that I was a fan of, I was interested in it because it commented usually on things that I didn't yet know. You were watching, and I found that interesting. Like, I've always thought that the world, when you go out into the world, you must take the world on for itself. You can't expect the world to become something you want it to be. You have to go out and find the world as it is and figure out what your place in the world is, or if there's something you want to change about the world, that's something you have to do as well. And I feel that that's what storytelling was always about, or what it used to be about. Stories would allow you into the worlds of people and places and things that you wouldn't normally go. And hopefully, by experiencing those stories, you realize that even though these stories were about people and places that were very different than what you were used to, there was still a truth in those stories that could illuminate something about your own life. But you would go out and meet those things head on. Now I feel that a lot of people think that whatever work is out there, it needs to have some connection to them. Like now, with our phones, we have all this information that we've curated that's coming into us, and we expect everything to be exactly the way we want it to be. And I think that that's absurd. I think the whole point of storytelling is to convey human truths to one another, to show that despite the fact that you might be watching, I don't know, Hotel Rwanda with Don Cheadle about what happened in Rwanda, the Rwandan genocide, and what one man could have done to combat it. That's why I really liked that movie. I was not there. I was never going to be a part of that, and I learned from that movie about things I don't know, difficult truths to grapple with. And I think that's true of anything. But nowadays, it's almost like if this doesn't immediately touch my buttons, so to speak, then it's no good to me. And I feel it's everything is inverted now. And I think we live in a world that it's difficult, like comedy. You know, comedy is the old adage, what is it? Was it dying is easy, comedy is hard? And I think that's true. And now we live in a world where people expect comedy to be the way they want it to be. As opposed to, like, if you hear something that's offensive or you're offended by comedy, the problem is not the comedy, the problem is you. And now it's been inverted. Now the problem is with the comedy. If you're offended, well, that comedy better change. And that's a really interesting way. I think that speaks to the modern age in not a very flattering way. The world, you got to go out into the world. You can't expect the world to be the way you want it to be. And when people are that way, it says more about people, I think, than it says about the world or the comedy or any of those things. But in terms of, I still, like, we've talked about how Marvel movies are different kinds of genres. Like, yes, The Winter Soldier is a 70s conspiracy thriller type of a film, but it's still a superhero movie. As much as I find the light comedic first Ant-Man movie to be a fun heist film, it's still a superhero movie. You know, and I know that the upcoming She-Hulk TV series is going to be more meta and funny. So I don't think they're trying to subsume other genres. I think Marvel is just doing what they did. I think the real problem is that those niche comic books you talked about, whether it was horror or rom-coms or whatever, they had only a very specific audience, whereas superheroes, especially for Marvel, just had a much broader appeal. Whereas how many, I don't know, 16-year-old boys were reading romance comics? I don't know anything about that. I don't have the data on that. I mean, for me, the closest thing wasn't... Omaha the Cat Dancer was an X-rated furry comic that was also a soap opera that I actually kind of liked. Love and Rockets, things like that. Those were not superhero comics, but books I liked. But anyway, yeah. I don't know. Well, I want to thank you for the letter. Joey Hamilton writes in. Joey Hamilton says, "Hi, Rob. I've been reading reviews for Ghostbusters Afterlife, and while I haven't seen the film yet, I feel like I already have. This seems like yet another cynical Hollywood rehash soft reboot, complete with insulting self-referential fan service that will appeal to easily manipulated man-children and just about nobody else. Now, perhaps I'm being a bit harsh, but this is a trend I've noticed for a number of years. Hollywood has seemingly moved past unnecessary remakes of classic movies that bank on recognizable IP and add almost nothing new. After all, do we really want to see a Star Wars with a new Han and Leia? Indiana Jones without Harrison Ford? Ghostbusters without Murray, Aykroyd, Hudson, and Ramis? No. So what do we do now? We either do a full fleshed-out remake in the same continuity, whether it makes sense or not, with new characters who follow similar arcs to the original characters while sprinkling in references and original characters, see Force Awakens and Creed. This formula seems to be the best of both worlds. The fans of the original don't dismiss the new film on arrival, and the studios can still use the IP while introducing new characters to lead the franchises into newer adventures and, of course, new merchandising possibilities. Sometimes this strategy works surprisingly well. Creed received Oscar considerations. The Force Awakens was widely accepted, though the rest of the sequel trilogy stumbled before crashing and burning with The Rise of Skywalker, though the success of The Force Awakens and Creed seemingly opened the floodgates for other franchises to dredge up old ideas and old characters for nostalgia bait while not providing much new, and certainly not much innovation. Since 2015, we have seen the soft reboot in-universe continuation late sequel model crank up to 11. We still have Michael Keaton back as Batman. Jamie Lee Curtis is once again battling Michael Myers. Arnold is still the Terminator. Ewan McGregor is Obi-Wan again. The original Jurassic Park cast is back. Harrison Ford is back as Indiana Jones with a younger female protagonist who will probably take on the mantle in future installments. Picard is back. The Shining. Blade Runner. And just you wait, Rob, we will see Harry Potter come back with its original cast. Is this what we do now? We either just remake the old movies with a new cast or make forgettable, mediocre films with endless nostalgia fan fiction that gets us super excited for 5 minutes and then forgotten. Now on to Spider-Man, No Way Home. Rob, Tobey Maguire was my Spider-Man. I saw the original film in theaters as a child. I owned the toys, the video game. I had a Tobey Maguire Spider-Man costume, the Lego sets, everything. I was sad when the franchise ended and they rebooted the franchise, but eventually accepted it and moved on. As a teenager, I used to fantasize about Tobey coming back into the franchise one way or another. The old Spider-Man animated series had an episode about multiple universes and alternate Spider-Man, so the idea wasn't that far-fetched to me, but it seemed way out of bounds for a Hollywood movie. Back then, the idea of having separate Batman on TV and in the movies was deemed confusing. But here we are in 2021, and in 1 month, I will likely see all 3 movie Spider-Men in one film together, coming from the same studio that brought us Ghostbusters Afterlife. From the trailers, it looks like it's Tom Holland's Spider-Man movie for the first 2 acts, continuing off the last movie, with the final act being a nostalgia-induced fanboy fever dream where all the old Spider-Man villains battle all the Spider-Men. Doesn't it feel like we've already seen the movie? Like we already know the beats, the cheer moments, the callbacks? Fans are already making fan cuts where MJ is falling and Tom can't reach her, but out of nowhere, Andrew Garfield swoops in and saves her, calling back to The Amazing Spider-Man 2 from 2014. And I bet they're right. I'll bet that is exactly what happens because it's so obvious and it'll receive a round of applause opening weekend. Tobey Maguire will make a great grand entrance as we hear Danny Elfman's theme kick in. The characters will dramatically turn and see him swing into the final battle. We all know it's coming, and yet we're all excited. Yes, Rob, I too am both disgusted and giddy about the scene I know is coming. What are we making that's new? Where's the new Millennium Falcon? Even if these movies are good or passable, they can't be what they once were, which by and large was lightning in a bottle that clicked at the right time due to the creativity and clever writing. Do we need a movie where a young kid sneaks into the abandoned Brown mansion and discovers the DeLorean? No. These movies we are getting are movies we think we want, but we don't actually want. They give us a moment or two of joy as we remember our childhoods, and then the movies can't stand alone on their own 2 feet. In 20 years, we'll still remember Ghostbusters. But Ghostbusters Afterlife? It'll be left behind. I hope we as fans don't allow ourselves to be manipulated by this model. I hope Spider-Man No Way Home has a good reason for this multiverse crossover. We'll see. Joey. Joey, that is a fine letter, sir. And again, I can't disagree with you. I mean, you know, again, all of the great cinematic experiences of my life are usually unique, or unless the sequels are very different. I think about Aliens, Ridley Scott's Alien and James Cameron's Aliens, 2 very different kinds of movies set in the same universe with the same central character. But Aliens felt like it was unto itself. The Road Warrior. As much as I loved Mad Max, The Road Warrior is a very different kind of a movie. And it's funny because when The Road Warrior first came out, it was a 1981 movie that got released in the States in 82. I remember I'd seen the first Mad Max, and of course the first Mad Max in America was dubbed because everyone had such thick Australian accents. It wasn't until later, like in the last 20 years, where I finally got to see Mad Max where it wasn't dubbed in English. But when you saw Road Warrior, it was a very different movie. And Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome was kind of criticized because it wasn't enough like Road Warrior. But, you know, I watched it again recently. Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome now I love it. I mean, it's such a different kind of a movie. But yeah, I mean, if we can get things that are different enough, the experience of watching Alien is a very different experience than watching Aliens, but both feel of a piece. Terminator 1 and Terminator 2, same kind of thing. Different story to tell. I think they both are worthy of existing. And that's what I want to see more of. I mean, if I'm going to see a sequel or a reboot or something, I want to see a sequel or a reboot that is redolent, reminds me of the first one, but it stands on its own. And I don't know. I mean, the one thing that I'm looking at, I really like Tom Holland's Spider-Man. I think that both Homecoming and Far From Home are fine. I'm still waiting to get a transcendent Spider-Man movie. I still think Spider-Man 2 with Dr. Otto Octavius is still probably the best Spider-Man movie because the stakes were personal to Peter. And while I've enjoyed Tom Holland, I especially loved his introduction in Civil War, I would love to see a movie that's all about him. All of these movies, I mean, he was tied to Iron Man. Now he's going to be tied to Doctor Strange. I want to see a Spider-Man movie. Now, I'm not saying I don't like Tom Holland. I do. I just want to see a movie that is about Spider-Man. And we'll see. I mean, No Way Home, look, it's going to tickle all those boxes, I'm sure. Or tickle them. It'll tickle you, but it'll tickle all those boxes, I'm sure. But we'll see. I mean, whether Tobey Maguire or Andrew Garfield show up, I mean, that'll be a lot of fun to watch all of that. But at the end of the day, will it be something you come back to over and over again? Because when the gimmick is over, is the movie going to be worthy? I mean, I think you could do a whole character. You don't even need those villains. You could have taken the premise of Peter Parker, now that he's outed, how his life would be destroyed when everyone knows he's Spider-Man. That could have been a movie unto itself. But instead, I mean, I'm not going to diss on Spider-Man No Way Home because I got to tell you, as a comic book fan, that shit looks dope to me. But I know exactly what you're saying, and I don't disagree with you. Donnie Pearson says, hello, Rob and all. Hope everyone's weekend was more phenomenal. Speaking of which, there was news recently reported by comicbooks.com that Netflix is becoming the official home to the Power Rangers cinematic universe of movies, including the upcoming movie reboot that was supposed to be distributed by Paramount, and television series, including Season 2 of Dino Fury. Of course, I don't blame those who were like, modern Power Rangers drools. Let me know what you think, and remember, Rangers forever, defending together. Thanks, and may the power protect you all. Regards, Donnie Pearson. Well, Donnie, you know, I like Super Sentai. I mean, Kamen Rider, you know, the beginning of all this. I have a great Kamen Rider quarter scale figure. I'm a fan. But let's face it, I was a little too old for Power Rangers. I also didn't like the fact that they were taking footage from Japanese shows and integrating them with shot. I mean, I get why they did it, and I understand, but I was just a little too old. However, the Power Rangers, look at how long they've lasted. What a cockamamie idea that Saban had to do that. I'm going to buy these shows, and we're going to bring them to America, and I'll take all the Japanese special effects and integrate them with new footage we're going to shoot with American actors. Kind of brilliant. And now that there's a huge mythology surrounding the Power Rangers, they've been around for what, 25 years now or something? So I will defer to you the same way that Stubble McShave is the expert of Wheel of Time around these parts. You, Donnie Pearson, you can be the official more phenomenal Power Rangers fan of the Burnettwork. I don't know what we call that. You're the biggest. I like the word more phenomenal. You say whenever you write in, you say more phenomenal. It's fun to say. I've got to hand it to you. So Donnie Pearson, I anoint you. You, sir, are the official more phenomenal Power Rangers keeper of the flame for the Burnettwork. There you go. That and a quarter won't get you a cup of coffee, but I can bestow that honor on you right now, and I will. So here you go. Hope you're watching, Donnie. You are now the more phenomenal, official more phenomenal keeper of the flame of the Power Rangers franchise for the Burnettwork. So there you go. This is another letter from Omar. I'm just going to read it. Why not? Hi, Rob, moderators in Post-Geek Singularity. You mentioned how you found Tick, Tick, Boom to be the best film of 2001 you've seen so far. It is. For those of you who don't know, Tick, Tick, Boom is my favorite movie of the year so far that I've seen. Yes, more than Dune. I mean, I love movies. I'm a sucker for movies about showbiz, the creative impulse. It is so well done, and it is so... It is uplifting, and it's also sad at the end, but I loved it. It's an incredible character study. It's why you go to the movies. And it's one of those things that I know there's a lot of people that don't like musicals. One, I think you need to give it a chance. You know, I used to think that. Why would I don't like musicals. I thought that until I saw West Side Story in 70mm. No, not Spielberg's version, although I can't wait to see that. The original. I was blown away by the original, even from the opening, which has an overture, and you're watching this really interesting graphic representation of New York sort of fade in, and you hear the music. It's fucking great. You know, if you watch West Side Story and you don't want to be a jet or a shark, because when you're a jet all the way from your first cigarette to your last dying day, you have no soul. I can't wait to see. I was watching a thing about Rita Moreno, and man, do I want to see this movie. Rita Moreno is almost 90, and she's in this film. I can't wait. I've wanted to see Spielberg make a musical my whole life. I mean, if you watch the opening of Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, the Anything Goes number, there's some stuff in color purple, some musical numbers in there. Suge Avery singing "Sister." You know, I want. Now I get it. I wish he made an original musical, but that's okay. Anyway, so Omar says, "Oh, Tick Tick Boom." That's right. I was reading an article about a letter from Omar. Omar says, "Hi, Rob, moderators in the Post-Geek Singularity. You mentioned how you found Tick Tick Boom to be the best movie of 2021 you've seen so far. With that, I noticed a problem with movies and TV shows which come out on streaming. John Campea brought this up quite a bit, and he has a point. Where Netflix does the worst job of marketing its movies and shows. This has been a case to an extent with me, as I don't typically find out about any of the movies and TV shows until sometime they're on Netflix. This was the case for The Queen's Gambit. I'd never heard of that show until you started talking about it on Robservations. Then I decided to check it out and found out how it came out a month or so ago before I started watching it, and I'd never heard of it. And I don't remember any trailers or anything like that. In the case of Tick Tick Boom, I didn't even know if it was coming out on streaming. I'd seen very little promotion for it, and it already had come out. That was just something I think is a problem with Netflix and streaming in general, is how there's a lack of promotion. Thanks, and live long and prosper." Omar, I couldn't agree with you more. You know, I try and watch trailers for things that are coming out, but I can only find Netflix trailers if they make them and if they show up in my feed. Like, I didn't even know that the director of Train to Busan had made a show called Hellbound. It wasn't until I saw him, like, what the hell's this? I watched a trailer for it, and I'm like, oh my God, this is some dope-ass shit. I can't wait to see it. And then, of course, I thought it was going to be like 6 months from now. Nope. It was like on Netflix 2 weeks later. It's 6 episodes of delightful deliciousness. And if you want to see some serious dark fantasy that'll make you start pondering your life and thinking about religion and God and hell and retribution, and I mean, there's all kinds of stuff that goes on in Hellbound. Watch it. It's right up my alley. But yeah, I didn't hear of it either. So I didn't even know it was coming out. And I think it sucks. I think streaming services, because they don't care. You know, they're going to put that stuff on there and people are going to discover it or not. And they do. Like, look what happened to Squid Game. You know, they didn't need to promote it. Already people were talking about the Squid Game. And I think that, look, Tick Tick Boom, they have been promoting it. But it's a bummer. Because it's not like movies where, you know, people, I'm not in the, I have to say, I've taught myself to go onto YouTube and look up trailers, just what's going to be on Netflix. Because there's all kinds of, like, crazy foreign shit I didn't even know was on Netflix. I'm like, what is this? It looks cool. I'll go watch this. I'm always seeing, go to YouTube and start looking up Netflix trailers, because there's a lot of shit that looks fucking dope. And you're not going to know that it's there unless you look it up. Because what does Netflix do? I mean, they don't even show trailers. I mean, you can look at trailers, but I think that Netflix, every time you log in, should show you like 3 trailers. Like at the ArcLight when you go see a movie. There's no more ArcLight anymore, but if there was, they would always show 3 trailers. They should just show you 3 trailers when you log into Netflix. I know people would bitch and moan and be like, oh, Rob, I don't want 3 trailers from Netflix, but I think they should. They should look at your analytics and maybe show you things that you might want to see. If you like foreign films, they always have some cool foreign shit on Netflix that you can find. But I agree. Who knows? This next one comes from J.D., spelled out. Hi, Rob. I wanted to like Eternals, but I don't know how anyone really could. Certainly no fan of good science fiction. I have no great love for the comics, so I wasn't bothered if they changed it even a lot. There was no real way to film the Kirby original as it was, and it was a bad idea in the 70s to integrate the Eternals with the Marvel Universe. It was going to be even tougher to bring them into the MCU in a way that made any sense, and they failed spectacularly. Well, JD, respectfully, I would like to disagree with you. I never thought the MCU was supposed to be our universe. It has to operate on different physical laws, or else many of the powers and how they're acquired wouldn't be possible. But now we learn that the creation of life, even the creation of the stars in the sky, requires the personal intervention of a god. And really overworked god, too. If a celestial is born every million years, there are only at most 14,000 of them for the entire universe of anywhere from 2 billion to 2 trillion galaxies. And if Arashem created the first star, where did Arashem come from? Another universe, like Galactus, or God himself, or herself, or itself? I guess maybe they're trying to set up the Celestials as the creators, Galactus as the destroyer, the Celestials' yin to Galactus' yang, or something. Even worse is the idea of a single measly planet being enough to create a celestial. They can create stars out of nothing, and the energy required to do that, and the energy you'd get from it once it's created would be far greater than you'd get from a planet. In the Thor comics, I think from the early 90s, it was revealed that the entirety of the organic black galaxy was a gestating celestial. But even that was stupid, because it makes the Celestials knowable, just a little bit, and they're supposed to be a total enigma. I know, that title crawl was partially bullshit. We find out the Eternals are robots, etc., but was it all bullshit? In his James Bond villain monologue, Arashem tells Cersei a lot of the same stuff about their role in creation. I guess he could just be blowing smoke out, but why bother? And why, after billions of years of this, are the Celestials such shitty programmers? They create the Eternals to deal with the Deviants when the Deviants should have been child's play for someone capable of creating a star. Then again, 14,000 Celestials for the entire universe means they're probably overworked and underpaid. Maybe the World Engine, or whatever it's called, is some old broken down piece of shit, and Arashem's been complaining to the head office for a new one for millions of years, and they just won't pony up. And you know, if Arashem had just kept the real plan to himself and just told them not to interfere too much just because he said so, and certainly if he hadn't revealed the plan to Cersei, things would have gone to plan. What exactly is that the new Celestial feeding on? If they need energy, you're not going to get much from any planet. Why intelligent life? What does that do? They don't say. There's no such thing as a life force. Bioelectricity isn't much competition for the vast energy you'd get from even a small sun like ours. The Deviants look like 90s CGI. The romance stuff all goes nowhere. Jon Snow is totally superfluous. It seems like he was only in the movie at all so he could appear in the post-credit sequence. Well, it's kind of true. I miss the days where once the credits rolled, you could leave. The bad CGI of the Deviants is topped by that troll dude with Star Fox, brother of Thanos, who now I guess is a robot too? If the Eternals weren't supposed... No, Thanos is a natural birth. He's a natural birth. If the Eternals weren't supposed to interfere with Thanos, okay, although, as many have pointed out, he was a threat to the entire universe and his plans ran directly counter to the whole purpose of the Celestials. But the Celestials have been around the block a few times and maybe somehow knew Thanos would fail and the whole thing would be undone. The movie gives us no reason to think that's the case, though. Even if I buy that non-interference stuff, though, what about this Tiamat and the threat he posed to Earth? That's something groups like the Avengers would have an interest in stopping, and it's hard to see how they would have failed to notice. Maybe the Avengers, the X-Men, the Watcher, Wakanda, everybody were all busy dropping deuces at the same time and missed it? No explanation for why the Celestials would make Sprite a perpetual child. What advantage being deaf is for Makari? And hey, they all come preloaded with the American Sign Language software package. Why, they'd make just one of their number gay when they all have different accents that wouldn't exist 7,000 years ago. Why are their names from Greek mythology if the Olympian gods must exist alongside the Asgardians and others? And their powers are kind of stupid. Sure, in the comic they developed specialities, but they all had the same basic powers of flight, energy projection, super strength. These abilities would have been pretty useful, especially since Cersei, Ajax, Sprite, and Druig are just professional bench warmers in every fight. They never really fight as a team. Well, they're not the fighters, man. Or have ever had any plan. They save each other sometimes, sure, but that's not the same thing. The forced diversity of the movie didn't bother me, except as far as they obviously picked characters few people knew and fewer people care about to put all of their diverse eggs in one basket. And I can definitely see why some black viewers complain that the only black dude on the team is both a schlub and gay. Just like Asians complained about Shang-Chi's average Joe nature, which I know was part of the point, but it's not like there are a ton of other Asian hotties in the MCU. Was Louis Tan busy? Uh-oh, Louis Tan reference. You know what that means. That means Zephyr Chan just melted down. Except for Sprite, why are they all middle-aged? Why does Icarus get to be the only hottie among the dudes? If you're going to have gay characters on the team, why not Thena, Ajax, Cersei, and Makari? That seems like a no-brainer. Maybe they're saving that for the porn parody. Overall, this just seemed like a colossal misfire. I can only hope there's a James Gunn type who can make a much better sequel if the sequel ever happens. It might be kind to everyone to just pretend it never happened. I haven't seen Zhao's other movies, but she might have been the wrong choice for something like this. But then I don't think Peter Jackson has done anything like Lord of the Rings before he got that gig, nor had Taika Waititi before he did Thor Ragnarok. The idea that people are hating on this movie because Zhao's a woman and Asian is ludicrous. Just like it's ludicrous to think there are people, it's ludicrous to think there's an MCU backlash. I think there is, though. But if there is one, because fuck those successful people. It seems like it would be racism to support a bad movie just because the director is Asian and a woman, and it would be to judge the movie on its own merits. Luckily, David Ayer's white, so we're free to hate Suicide Squad. The Kingo race swap was interesting. Usually it's from white to something else, not usually Asian to a different type of Asian. A Japanese character or an Eternal posing as Japanese, played by a Pakistani playing an Indian. It's not like there aren't a lot of Bollywood actors out there, many of them studs who could have played the part. Kingo's valet was probably my favorite, though. It's funny, I've heard people talk about this movie as being profound, which is hilarious. Profoundly stupid, profoundly insulting, sure. In terms of qualities, The Eternals is to the MCU what Discovery and Picard are to Star Trek, what No Time to Die is to James Bond. Finally, a lot of movies these days feel overlong, like studios are trying really, really, really hard to tell us, this is an event. Look at how long it is. There's a reason the Snyder Cut was so long. After all the build-up, you couldn't do a new cut that wasn't substantially longer. There's a reason Dune is so colossally long when it didn't need to be. The Eternals is a lightweight compared to those, but it still felt really padded. I came out of this movie wondering why my asshole hurt. JD. Well, Jay, I have to say that, you know what? I liked Eternals, and I don't disagree with you. Go figure. All of those things that you brought up are all fair points. There's no hill that I would go die on after reading what you said. I mean, sometimes things can work, sometimes they can't. And I've been criticized. You know, people are like, well, Rob, you're always bitching and moaning and complaining about things, and how do you give these other movies a pass? Well, I'll tell you. Sometimes, if I feel it, maybe the emotional content of it gets to me. And for whatever reason, there's things in the Eternals that the cosmology of it all, I don't have the answers about the why not just throw an Eternal in a star and supercharge that guy so he can come to life right away? That's a very good point. I mean, who knows? Maybe it works differently. I don't know. But, they based it on the Earth X comics. And I think probably, there's a lot of things that might have made it more enjoyable if you knew what was going on. But something about the Eternals, it got to me. I liked it. But you're not wrong. I read your letter, and I thought it was very convincing. And I'm like, you know what? Fuck that movie. I'm out. But I liked it. But your letter was great points. This next letter comes from Thomas Bennett. Hi, Rob. In this email, I'm going to talk about representation in movies. Uh-oh. A couple of days ago, you talked about Eddie Redmayne and the Danish Girl. He said that if he had the choice to do it all over again, he wouldn't have taken the role. Your response to that was something along the lines of, it's an actor's job to pretend to be somebody else. You also said you supported Eddie's remarks because you support people who stand up for minority communities. Feel free to correct me if I got any of that wrong. Well, actually, I think that Eddie Redmayne should not necessarily have walked his comments back and say, well, upon second thought, I shouldn't take the role. Before I read any further, let me just be clear. While I agree that there are plenty of actors, perhaps trans actors or non-binary people that don't have the representation they should have in Hollywood. But the problem is, it doesn't matter who you are. There's 10,000 or 100,000 people, white men, in Hollywood trying to play white men. And very few of those people, of those 100,000 people, are going to get a job because they're not good actors. So this idea that, and then when you're going to make the pool even smaller, of those 100,000 people that are trying to be actors, white dudes trying to be actors, there's probably 100 of them that are worth their weight or worth their salt. What do you want that are any good? And of those 100 that are left, only one's going to get the role. So out of 100,000 white men to play a white role, a white dude, you still have a very, very, very small chance. Now, when you're asking someone to play a gay or a trans character, I would say specifically a trans character because the trans population in the United States, comparatively speaking, is very small. So, and then you're asking, not only is that community small, but then you're asking to find somebody who's of the same acting caliber as Eddie Redmayne. And there's not anybody. I mean, there's not, what I'm trying to say is there's not very many people that can play that are part of the same community. And while is it important to have trans actors or LGBTQ actors working? I mean, there's always been LGBTQ actors working. We just didn't know it half the time. Yes. But, I would much rather have it be that an actor can portray anybody they want. You need the best actor for the role. Would I cast a trans woman to play the romantic lead in a rom-com? Sure. If they were the best actor for the role. Why not? I mean, I think that actors are actors, and ever since the days of the Globe Theater, when men were playing all the women in Shakespeare's plays, you just got to find the best actor. And if you start getting stuck on this representation, to ask somebody, it's just, I always throw out the Roy Scheider was not really a cop, but he was a cop in Jaws. He was a cop in The French Connection. Does Roy Scheider have to be a cop to play a cop? No, you're acting. You're pretending to play someone else. And if we're expecting now, wait a minute, if you're pretending to play somebody else, no, you can only cast people that have that are partially the people that's just absurd. It's absurd. And take the representation out of it. You're an actor. It's like Tom Sizemore who's talking to Bronson Pinchot in True Romance. You're an actor. Act, motherfucker. That's all that matters. I mean, can you imagine if Ted Levine, who wanted to become a woman by creating a suit of skin, nowadays somebody would get all pissed because of the representation in Silence of the Lambs. Well, you can't hire that guy. It'd be stupid. Anyway, your response to that, back to Thomas's letter. Your response to that was something along the lines of, it's an actor's job to pretend to be somebody else. I don't know if I ever brought it up in previous letters, but I have cerebral palsy. That's a fancy doctor way of saying brain damage suffered at birth in my case. Storytelling and story structure is my passion. When I went to college from 2003 to 2007, I discovered my community when I met theater people. I wanted to get a theater degree and work in the theater simply to be around a community of people that understood the importance of including everybody in your social circle, especially if they have a unique, interesting, and challenging life story you can learn from. Here's the secret. Everyone has a unique, interesting, and challenging life story you can learn from. This is especially true of people who deal with challenges invisible to the rest of us, which, by the way, sir, is, as you know, the very point of this YouTube channel. Unfortunately, I was successfully dissuaded from pursuing a career in theater because I didn't think long-term that my body could sustain working 12 to 16 hours a day, 7 days a week. I was in a couple of college productions, and the recuperation after this, productions didn't seem like a sustainable work model for me for the rest of my life. Also, the theater department at college I was going to was being downsized, and the venues where theater productions took place were not wheelchair accessible. Honestly, I didn't want it badly enough at the time. I have been excluded from many normal groups and experiences in my life because so many people don't consider wheelchairs or universal accessibility. In my experience, it's rarely intentional. But if you don't have personal experience of using a wheelchair in your daily life, you don't really think about accessibility as deeply as I have to do on a daily basis. This is a really interesting time to be alive, because I do empathize with marginalized groups. I am part of one. On the other hand, living in a victim identity 24/7 doesn't really allow you to navigate the world more successfully, at least in my experience. So, what does this have to do with representation in acting roles? I thought about this a lot since I heard your take on Eddie Redmayne, and I think it comes down to verisimilitude. Certainly, you can have able-bodied people play disabled characters with great success. Robert De Niro in Awakenings and Anne Hathaway in Love and Other Drugs come to mind. Maybe I'm saying that because I don't have direct experience with Parkinson's disease, though. I don't know. I love the show Speechless, and the fact that Micah Fowler actually has CP did add a layer of verisimilitude for me because his CP body movements were literally authentic. On the other hand of the spectrum, I hated Glee because they hired Kevin McHale to play Artie Abrams, the wheelchair user on the show. Kevin is able-bodied. I also hated The Upside with Kevin Hart and Bryan Cranston because of its cookie-cutter approach to the disabled story where the naive able-bodied person learns about life from the disabled mentor, and the disabled person learns to enjoy life more and not be so depressed all the time. For that matter, I also really didn't like Me Before You, the movie based on the Jojo Moyes novel. The more I think about this, the more it comes down to verisimilitude in characterization and storytelling. I don't think it's essential to hire someone from a marginalized group to get an authentic performance, but I can easily spot able-bodied actors acting how he thinks or she thinks a disabled person would act, if that makes sense. I think there's value in hiring actors from marginalized communities because, on average, I think they have a better chance at having an authentic performance, so I think there is value in having role models that we can look up to in society. I totally agree with you, sir. I will say I think diversity quotas in Oscar categories is a stupid thing to do. Diversity quotas make traits a person can't control more important than the individual soul, controlling whatever meat suit they happen to be in. And if we really want a world where everyone is treated with tolerance and respect, we need to focus on the individual soul instead of incomplete and inaccurate labels about who we think they are from the outside. Thomas. That was a great letter. As many people know, I had a college roommate with CP, and it was heartbreaking. He, his body just didn't work. He was a very smart guy, trapped in a body, and it was pretty severe. And, I used to take him, we'd go shopping. I'd take him to the mall, and the looks that people gave him, the whispers and the things people said was heartbreaking because his mind was fine. It was his body that was betraying him, and I learned all about that. And there was some pretty extreme situations that developed, personal situations, personal things about hygiene and stuff that I learned all about, and it was rough, man. It was rough. But look, I agree with you. I think that hiring if you wanted to have a trans character in your movie, it would be best to hire a great trans actor to play that part. I think that would be the ideal situation. I would much rather have that for what you just said, verisimilitude. There'd be an authenticity of that person's performance. But the thing is, you know what? If I have my choice, if I was casting a project and I was making a movie about a trans woman, I would much rather hire a trans woman to play that part. But they'd have to be a great fucking actress. That's at the end of the day. And if it came down, and also, if the financiers are not going to make the movie unless you have a name actor in the role, I don't know, what do you do about that? I guess you could surround that trans actress with a bunch of other actors that appease the financiers, but it's a tough call. It doesn't matter what movie you're making. You've got to explain, well, who's going to be in this movie? Because if we're going to invest millions of dollars in it, we need somebody that we can put on the poster that someone's going to go see. And that is an economic reality that trumps representation. Because if you don't have the economic realities sorted out about making the movie's never going to get made. And is that better? At the time, would Philadelphia have been made without Tom Hanks playing the role? Would it be made people would have, nowadays, people are like, what? You're casting Tom Hanks as a dying gay man, dying of AIDS? You wouldn't be able to do that now. But would that movie have gotten made without Tom Hanks and Denzel Washington together? I don't know. But I think that story went a long way toward helping the gay community get some understanding from a general population that was fearful, that was hearing all about the AIDS epidemic. And I think it probably did a lot more good for many people who needed that to be seen by the general population than if it never got made. So, but it's a question, man. It is a question. Tom Jr. Jackson, the king of the goofs. Tom Jr. Jackson has written in. Hello, Rob. I want to write to you today about the topic of speculation. I admit we all do it. Guys do it. Girls do it. Wait, that didn't sound right. Anyways, I have an issue with speculation. When people speculate about things, especially when it comes to Marvel, they go overboard. How did they go overboard? Well, let's take WandaVision as the biggest way of speculation, and how when that speculation turned out to be wrong, people were pissed. And the only one to be upset with is not Marvel. It's the speculators themselves. They built it up in their minds of what or who might be in the situation in the movie or show, and I'll admit to have done it a few times, and as fun as it was, it still turns out to not be what I was thinking, and sometimes that can go in a good way and surprise me and be better than I was thinking, or could be a dud. Now let's look at Spider-Man No Way Home. You've got everyone speculating that so-and-so is in this movie and that there will be 3 Spider-Men. Just wondering if anyone's thought about the fact that even though there may be proof there will be Spider-Men, there might not actually be 3 Spider-Men. I'm willing to bet that if there are not 3 Spider-Men, people are going to crap all over this film. I totally agree with you. It's gotten to the point now where everyone just believes that even though Andrew Garfield has come out and said, I am not in Spider-Man No Way Home. Everyone's like, it's the best kept secret in Hollywood. Hey, judging by what we know about the movie, they probably are in it, but there's a possibility they're not in it either. Or 2, yeah. And then people will be pissed. I'm willing to bet that if there are not 3 Spider-Men, people are going to crap all over this film because of all the speculation and hype they've built up over the film. Now, speculation can be fun and anyone can do it, but don't let speculation turn into expectation, because once you do that, you've ruined the joy of the film that you wanted to see. That's why I always go into a film without expectations. That way, I'll be able to either enjoy the film or not enjoy it. I will admit I was not a fan of the Hugh Jackman film Reminiscence. I should send you my review for that one. I have it here in my room somewhere. I'll send it as soon as I find it. Anyways, Rob, I want you to know that I'm not slamming anyone for speculation. I'm just saying that we need to be careful with it. Oh, and one more thing. You really should use the picture I made of you screaming at the clouds when you're going to have a rant. Because not only is it funny, but it could be the mascot for your epic rants. Well, I guess I'll leave it here and let you go on with the show. Have a goof day, and I mean it. Tom Jr. Jackson. Well, Tom, it's always good to hear from you. One of the foundational members of the Post-Geek Singularity. George Grosu writes in. Hey, Rob, I'm writing you this letter as a vent for my anger and frustration with Star Trek Discovery. All right. I just saw the latest episode of Season 4, episode number 2, Anomaly. And it was the straw that broke the camel's back. I could not tell you why this was the case after 4 seasons of nothing but hate for this show, but it was. But as a bit of a backstory, I'm not a connoisseur of Star Trek. I'm rather what you'd call a normie. But my link to Star Trek runs deep. For you see, I do not hail from the great North American continent, but from a small, forgettable country in Eastern Europe, formerly part of the communist bloc. Don't say your country's forgettable. Part of the communist bloc. I was born sometime at the end of the communist regime and the beginning of the democratic one. As a child growing up, entertainment was lacking. We did not have color TVs, and cable was a dream. All we had were 2 national TV stations from an antenna mounted in the front yard with news and bits of shows from the newly forgotten era. But in the year 1992, that all changed when we got Dallas on TV, and the whole country was enamored with JR and Jock Ewing, Bobby, Pamela, and all the others. After that, it was Baywatch. Dr. Quinn. It's amazing. You finally get out of being a communist regime, and then you get Dallas and Baywatch and Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman. Then in 1995, there came Star Trek The Next Generation, and I still vividly remember the moment the soundtrack started playing and my mouth dropped. I was but a kid, 6 years old, did not know how to read or a lick of English, but it did not matter. I was hooked on the shiny head of Captain Jean-Luc Picard. It was on a Sunday afternoon, and my parents or grandparents would read the subtitles aloud whilst I gaped at this fantastic world that was happening in front of me for an hour every week. It was the perfect blend of family time and fantastic time. Oh, I like that. Family time and fantastic time. I was feeling amazing with the people that I love taking me on adventures to the stars. In addition, I learned things. Chain of command, respect, honor, duty, friendship, perseverance, and so many more. Coming back to the present, watching now, I feel nothing but disgust. Hearing the ship's doctor say, some Admiral Picard, I think. The gall. TNG was never great all the time, but it treated its forefathers with respect. It treated the viewer with respect. It treated itself with respect. If this is the society to aspire to, then STD is the best name it's ever going to have. Thank you, Rob, and keep fighting the good fight. George. Well, George, I want to thank you for writing in. You and I park our shuttlecrafts in the same shuttle bay, sir. Just thought I'd point that out. Kevin, a.k.a. Pasty Copper Top, is here. Rob, with the excitement for the possible appearances of Tobey Maguire, Andrew Garfield, and the past villains in Spider-Man, and Michael Keaton in Flashpoint, there's a buzz floating around the films, but I think this is more of an indictment on fandom in Hollywood. I don't want to sound like a Debbie Downer, but when the excitement of a film is because characters from previous iterations of the franchise show up, it doesn't bode well for the newer versions. I think I'm probably being a little harsh, but it is a question I wanted to bring up to you. I love callbacks just like everyone else, but when all the buzz is centered around things that are speculative is bad for me. When it comes to fandom, we need to move forward and not always dwell on the past thinking that every one of these characters were better in past iterations. Hollywood, it's your job to move forward using the past as a guide to know what works for the franchise and build on the lore. Please, Hollywood, do better. I watched the first 2 episodes of Hawkeye last night. I found it enjoyable. I did too, by the way. I'm trying to be optimistic, but I have a bad feeling it will fail it will fall the Black Widow path and not really portray the character the way I would have hoped. Yes, I have the Matt Fraction run and understand the show will not be like the book, but I will wait and see how it goes. Your video on the downfall of the movie theater experience was great. I go to a one-screen theater that has been refurbished but still does not have the best video or sound. The seats are new and comfortable but not fancy. You know what, though? I love it because tickets are always $10 and it still looks like a theater from the 50s and it takes me away from the real world for a little while. The most important thing to me, though, is that I get to enjoy some entertainment with my family, and that means a lot. With that, I would wish you, your family, and everyone out there a wonderful Thanksgiving. You, sir, have a great day. I'll see ya. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Mark McCone writes in. Hello, Rob. I want to thank you for your thoughts on the decline of cinephilia and the standing of film in general culture. As someone who has devoted a great deal of my life to the appreciation of film as an art form, it struck many chords. I've been feeling exactly disillusioned with cinema lately, but it's just very sad that perhaps its extraordinary, once seemingly limitless and exciting potential, will be cut short. These are confusing, frightening times, and who knows how the future of exhibition will play out. I feel the medium has been devalued very severely as an art form in recent years for multifaceted reasons, many of which you outlined. Personally, when I was growing up, going to the cinema was a major, potentially life-changing event. Film was very exciting and romantic. Indeed, a fabled film just making its TV debut could send major reverberations throughout the local culture. I don't feel film has anything like that power as a cultural force anymore. It's just too close, too familiar, too much of the everyday to be truly magical. Nearly everyone in the Western world has the ability to make a film and distribute on their phone now. Extraordinary, but how much of that do I want to watch? Very little. Today I took possession of 4 DVDs of the work of Ozu, a great, great Japanese director. Extraordinary that I even know of and can instantly research this legendary director, let alone own some of his work on this excellent and seemingly now sadly antiquated format. Things have changed and are changing fast. The very meaning of the moving image has been swept up and transformed. I am like seemingly every other old school cinephile, frequently confused and alienated by all of this. After a day spent filming, editing, and uploading some more of that content that will largely be lost in the rush and an evening spent watching classic W.C. Fields films, I can only hold on and hope for the best. I don't know what I'm trying to express with these thoughts, other than I enjoyed your thoughts very much, and I feel it's good that these questions are being asked. These are, as ever, no easy answers. Best, Mark. Mark Nicone, well, let me tell you, first of all, Ozu, if you haven't seen any of Ozu's work, you should. Criterion's put out quite a bit of it. Look, I find it very strange now that half of the movies that I love are very different from the kinds of movies that are coming out today in the theater. Luckily, Criterion has done such an admirable job of making sure world cinema hasn't disappeared. And the Criterion Channel is excellent as well. You know, a director like Ozu is somebody that we would watch in film school and talk about. And it was interesting because, like, what you're talking about, film as an art form, I feel it's really that has really been lost. The kinds of movies that we're seeing today they're very, I would call them, especially from the studios, they're very homogenized now. I mean, even if you go back the 70s, there was all kinds of crazy movies coming out in the 70s from the studios and that big filmmakers were making, and they felt very adult. It's, you know, I think one of the things I loved about Tick, Tick, Boom was I felt like, oh, here's a movie about adults, younger adults, a man literally turning 30, and what his life was going to be like. He had dreams and aspirations that he was following. He didn't know if they would ever lead to anything. He's trying to navigate what he wanted to do as an artist with what he wanted to do as a human being. And then it was also a great musical. And I felt like, wow, it's been so refreshing to watch this movie, because I feel that all the movies that I watch, it seems, are genre films. And that's fine. That's fine. But my favorite movies are not necessarily genre movies. I mean, I think back to some of my favorite movies of all time. All About Eve, another movie set in the theater. All About Eve is one of my favorite movies of all time. I think it has one of the greatest screenplays ever written. Another film that's set also peripherally in the theater world is The Sweet Smell of Success. I mean, you watch these movies, watch All About Eve. It won Best Picture in 1950. It's no, it's not like it's some slouch of a movie. It was the Oscar winner of 1950. But you watch it, and it seems like it's about adults, people that I don't even know adult. I'm certainly not. I look at the people in All About Eve, and I'm like, I'm not half as mature as those people are. I mean, I'm probably older than all of them in the movie now, and I feel far less mature when I watch a movie like All About Eve. As a matter of fact, when I watch a lot of movies, The Godfather, I feel so much less mature than the people in that film. Apocalypse Now, you know, maybe I feel as mature as some of the people that are on the boat with Martin Sheen, but I feel like, you know, I used to watch movies because it was. I mean, you watch an Ozu movie, I mean, you feel like you're watching. I mean, that is art, and it feels far more mature than anything that's going on now. And you know, the important thing is you were able to get those DVDs and watch those movies. And I think now it's really hard to tell people to watch films. Like I've talked about it a lot on this channel. The Antonioni's Ennui trilogy, La Notte, La Ventura, and The Eclipse. I don't even know anyone. I don't know anyone. I mean, I know friends of mine, but there's very few people that are younger than me that I would ever feel comfortable. Hey, you should watch. I would not tell them to watch those movies, because I don't think people know how to watch those movies now anymore. And that kind of that's a bummer. And, you know, the more information that we have available to us, I think the less broad-minded we are, which is kind of a bummer. This letter comes from Jeff, a.k.a. J. Bing. You know, this is a Midnight Metal letter. This is this is a really long letter. I think I'll save this. I'll save this. Charlie the Unicorn writes in. Charlie says, Robbie, thanks for reading my letter. It's really quick because I want to hear your thoughts about the movie Birdman. I love Birdman. I highly recommend it to the PGS. I mean, I too love Birdman. That was me saying I was interrupting. It has an outstanding cast. Michael Keaton, Zach Galifianakis, Edward Norton, Andrea Riceborough, Amy Ryan, Emma Stone, Naomi Watts. The director, Alejandro Inarritu, and cinematographer, Emmanuel Lubezki, give a masterclass on how to transition between different shots while continuing to move the story forward. It really is remarkable for my amateur film watcher eye. It is truly a charming film, and I can see why it got love from the Oscars in 2012. But my question to you is this. Since you are an insider to Hollywood, I would say that I'm not an insider. I exist on the periphery. Do you think that this film accurately portrays the real Hollywood and Broadway to outsiders? The chaos behind the scenes, how the sausage is made in Hollywood and Broadway, and the struggle to stay relevant in the industry? Thanks, as always, from your friendly neighborhood unicorn. That's a really interesting question. Look, I think any movie that portrays Hollywood or the theater, and I just gave you a few, or movies about making movies, whether it's The Big Picture, or whether it's Swimming with Sharks, The Player, they are distillations. They can give you a broad perspective of movie making. And a lot of these things, or what it's like to work in the theater. I think Tick, Tick, Boom certainly did. At least, Tick, Tick, Boom is a movie about trying to get into the theater. So you don't actually get there yet, but it still shows you. One of my favorite movies about movie making is The Stuntman. Richard Rush's The Stuntman. I love that movie. One of my favorites. But I think whenever you're watching a movie about that, you're getting the broad strokes, the easily digested version of it all. Because, one of the things that you can't learn, like editing a movie, being an editor, sitting here with Gabe Malone, you're working on Tango Shalom, there's no way to convey, I don't think, in a movie what it was like to edit that movie over the four years that we edited that film. It would be really difficult. You can show like All That Jazz does a really good job. Another one of my favorite movies of all time does a really interesting job showing how editorial can actually alter scenes, which is good. I think it's the only movie that. Well, no, it's not true. What Just Happened? If you haven't seen What Just Happened, Barry Levinson's movie What Just Happened that stars Robert De Niro. Wow, man, that movie gives me agita whenever I watch it. But I think you get a pretty good idea. I think Birdman does a pretty good idea. It gives you a pretty good idea of the theater and what that all means. I thought it was. I really like Birdman a lot. Dave Scarpa writes in and says, "Your comment on the latest episode of Discovery is spot on. The characters are so emo, everyone goes through the episode all teary-eyed till one has to wonder if barrels of eye drops are being utilized on set. The whole thing was about 40 minutes of feelings and 9 minutes of plot, such as it were. I feel nothing with these characters. Maybe Book is the most relatable. The rest are cold fish. Their feelings are so fake and so worn on their sleeves." There's a scene in a third season episode of the original series, the supposedly weakest season, that Star Trek Discovery folks could only aspire to. It's in the episode The Empath. The Vians have just given a choice to cast Kirk. He can send Spock for their experiments, which would drive him insane, or send McCoy, who may die. McCoy takes matters into his own hypo and knocks Kirk out, sparing him the decision. He's overplotted to do the same to Spock. The empath of the title, Jem, goes over to Spock. She's a mute, and her face and mannerisms are the only source of her emotions. She touches Spock on the shoulder, and in her face, we the audience feel as she does and react, the terrible pain within the Vulcan as he suppresses his emotion and concern for the captain and doctor. You can feel the terrible conflict the Vulcan endures throughout his entire life. All of this without uttering a single word. Good writing, good storytelling lets the audience character build. All of this I understood as a 12-year-old watching that episode. Discovery doesn't report its audience to come to the same conclusion. I think you meant to say respect, doesn't respect its audience to come to the same conclusion. Look, I agree with you. The Empath, not necessarily one of the great episodes of Star Trek, but I've come to love it. It's one of those episodes I hated as a kid and love now. For the very reason you brought up. I mean, the writing on Star Trek Discovery is so didactic. I mean, and you know what? Look, Star Trek Discovery is the infantilized version of Star Trek, which is why I hate it so much. And I think that the audience, especially the audience for modern Star Trek, I understand why they like it, because they're getting the show, they're getting the world that they themselves want to exist in, where if you're feeling bad and feeling lonely or feeling down, someone's going to be there to catch you, and we'll talk about it, and we'll feel better. I understand that impulse. That's not why I watch science fiction. You know, I watch science fiction for the heady ideals, and Star Trek in particular, to see how mankind chooses to face the cold, dark cosmos out there. Star Trek Discovery, the last thing it's about is the cosmos. I mean, it's like, there's this this anomaly that's 5 light years across. We'll get to that. How are you feeling? I mean, it's the exact opposite of what a science fiction action adventure show is. It's inverted. It's very weird. I don't like it. But there you go. I want to thank you for sending that in. Let's see what you guys have been sending in. There's a lot of people who've been writing in today. I'm going to look and see what you guys have to say. Let's jump into it. Let's jump into what you guys have been saying. You've been here for a while. You've been waiting patiently. Wow, this has been how long has this episode been going on? I don't even know. Wow, we're almost at 2 hours. That's some crazy ass shit. I didn't realize that. See, you guys have been interesting me. I don't know if you guys found the letters interesting. I certainly did. Emil Johansson says, I think nostalgia is being killed in movies more than it is being indulged. The article sounds bitter. People expect too much from cinema. Not everything can be innovative. I don't know, Emil. I mean, I think when I was growing up watching movies were a lot more innovative. The funny thing is that they didn't have pre-programmed analytics. I mean, you know, there was a lot less gatekeepers that decided which movies got made, and I think movies were far more audacious, and I think movies were far more mature. But not all movies, but if you look at the studio output, I mean, heck, let's do an experiment. I'm gonna Google. Let's see, studio movies. Movies in 1976. 1976. Let's see. Studio movies in 1976. Let's see what they come up with. 1976 in film. This is from Wikipedia. These are the highest grossing movies of 1976. This is kind of interesting. Rocky, the A Star is Born remake, King Kong, Silver Streak, a comedy, All the President's Men, The Omen, The Bad News Bears, The Enforcer, In Search of Noah's Ark, and Midway. Now, of those, I can't believe one of them is a Sun Classic Picture, but that was United Artists, Warner Brothers, Paramount, 20th Century Fox, and Universal. Those are all, and if you think Rocky, that's a very diverse slate of films. Now, we also got, in 1976, at the Oscars, we got One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. We got Taxi Driver and Bugsy Malone. Network, did I already say that? Bound for Glory. I mean, there's a lot of, these are all studio movies. A lot of really interesting stuff. A lot of really interesting stuff that presupposed a intelligence on the part of the audience. So, I think now we're getting movies that are a little bit more dumbed down because they're much more expensive to make. And so and also movies are not being made for just American audiences anymore. They're being made for worldwide audiences, and that's another consideration. Movies that are being made now have to be simple, so they can translate foreign, and that's a big issue. Willow Yang says, I finished The Sopranos, and I personally think it's quite obvious Tony dies at the end. They even paid homage to the Godfather scene of Michael getting a gun from the bathroom. Who do you think ordered the hit, though? Oh, man. I don't know. Any number of people. But I couldn't tell you because it's been a while, actually, since I've seen the end. So, I don't know who ordered the hit. But yes, I agree with you. I think that Tony died. And I think that they've been saying that, too. David Simon's been saying that. But I don't know who ordered the hit. Good question. Who do you guys think ordered the hit on Tony Soprano in the last episode of The Sopranos? Plays with Squirrelies sends in a super chat and says, interested to hear your thoughts on this, Rob. I didn't think it was overt in Afterlife. It seemed like a love letter to the hardcore fans that have kept the franchise going for 37 years. I agree. But Ghostbusters, there was an animated show. Ghostbusters has been around. There was a great video game. And that's my problem with the movie, I think. More than anything, it seemed like a love letter to the fans as opposed to, like, it just seemed a little too different in tone. I was missing the tone of Ghostbusters. I felt like I was getting more of a Spielbergian version of Ghostbusters. The plot was fine, but it was so, earnest, and the snarky humor wasn't there. And I think the BBC article talking about Stranger Things was pretty dead on. It felt like it was more about the fans than the movie itself, which is kind of weird. So I agree with you. Lieutenant Commander Salinga says, it is important that you continue to watch over the integrity of the Trek franchise, since you are the only critical voice that not only knows the entertainment industry inside and out, but we're also connected to it professionally and have a personal connection as a fan. Anybody else is keeping a diplomatic tone as they don't want to burn bridges and risk the chance of a paycheck, so there is no real honesty coming from them, as they put... Gilbert is barking up a storm outside. Everybody else is keeping a diplomatic tone as they don't want to burn bridges and risk the chance of a paycheck, so there is no real honesty coming from them as they put personal interests over the integrity of the Star Trek franchise. Its importance goes beyond normal Hollywood product. The genius aspect, to use allegorical timeless storytelling to teach about ethics to a common audience, had a historic precursor. Fairy tales, collected by the Brothers Grimm. Trek is its successor. That's actually a really good point to make. Look, I agree with that very much. Ethics to a common audience. That is a great way of looking at what Star Trek did. Star Trek was a show about ethics, morality. I don't think modern Star Trek is. I don't think Star Trek has much ethics or morality to talk about at all. What it's talking about is feelings. Star Trek Discovery, modern Star Trek, is a show about people in therapy. The whole thing is an allegory for therapy. And it doesn't matter what plot is happening. That's just a way to set up emotional situations where people can respond and help each other. And I don't think that's what a science fiction, fantasy, or horror show is doing. I do not watch Discovery and ever think about my place in the universe or anyone's place in the universe, because the universe is immaterial. There's no wonder. There is no sense of awe and wonder at all in Discovery. It's all about our characters helping one another out. Oh, it's okay. It's okay. I'm here for you. That's not Star Trek. And the show has no commentary at all about the greater universe at large or what it means to be human in the cosmos. It's all the same thing. It's all about people who are in therapy. As a matter of fact, I think the whole show is an allegory for that. And at the end of the day, the only answer is that you're okay. You're going to be okay. Because I'm with you. And the thing is, that's not what Star Trek is about. So I'll keep up the fight. But I wonder, the problem is now is that seems to be what the audience wants. The people that like Star Trek Discovery, and I don't fault anybody for liking anything, that's what they're looking for. They're not looking for what Star Trek used to be. They're looking for what Star Trek has been turned into. And I mean, maybe that's a whole thing, but I think it speaks to our society. We don't live in a society where people, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. We live in a society when the going gets tough, you want to hear from somebody that's going to be okay. Thing is, you're not going to be okay. The cosmos is going to destroy us all at some point. And, you got to face it head on with your friends, but you can't worry about how you feel all the time. Jeff Yerke's here. Hello, Jeff. Jeff Yerke and Mrs. Y says, hello, Rob. This weekend, Lori and I gave 8 hours of our lives and $8 to Peter Jackson's Get Back with the Fab Four. I grew up with the Beatles and the media lies surrounding them. Well, despite it being 1 hour too long, it is amazing. I've heard that it's amazing. And I love the fact that this idea that Yoko destroyed the Beatles, that myth is destroyed by this documentary. I think that's great. It looks incredible. I started watching it. It's amazing. I find it one of the most fascinating looks at the creative process I think I've ever seen. So, it's amazing. Rick Squire says, Rob, do you have a YouTuber that covers astronomy? My favorite is an individual named V101. His videos are short, yet well packed with information. Plus, the production quality, including music, is quite awesome. Well, Rick, that's an interesting question. I never thought of it that way. There are certain astronomy videos that I watch, and I'm wondering if, in fact, this person that you bring up is one of those people. So let's take a gander. Is it somebody? Is this? It's so embarrassing when I call up YouTube and there's videos about action figures that I've been watching. I'm like, oh yeah. If people knew, although it's for whatever reason YouTube is not loading for me. Let me see if I can punch it in. What is it now? You said V101 science. V101. You know what? I have watched this guy's videos, but I don't subscribe. I'm now a subscriber. I wouldn't say that I wouldn't call it my favorite channel, but this is a great channel. I watched this video, what it's like inside Jupiter below the clouds of a gas giant. I watched that video. Wow, I've watched a lot of these videos. I didn't realize, you know what? I didn't know that. Well, now maybe he is my favorite. So everyone go subscribe right now. Rick Squire is correct. Go subscribe to, actually the name of the channel is officially, it is V101 Science. And I just became his 608,000 subscribers, I guess. That's just became that. Captain Beanzino sends in a super chat and says, hey, RMB, I'm a huge Resident Evil fan since day one. I think the new film is great and fans should see it. It's not perfect, but it's pretty darn close to the storyline or the story fans of Carpenter and Evil Dead will enjoy. Cheers. Well, Captain, I'm going to watch it. I've watched all the Resident Evil movies. Why not? And I know it's closer to the game. I'm in. Count me in. It's nice to hear that you have, as a big fan, you dig it. I like that. That's good to hear. Jay Bling sends in a tip and says, when you say that A-list filmmakers and stars are needed for a non-IP film to have a chance at being greenlit these days, it made me wonder. Has Hollywood failed to properly foster a new generation of visionary filmmakers? Oh, I think so. I don't know. There are very few filmmakers left who I will roll out. Like Paul Thomas Anderson, I'll go see anything he makes. I'll go see anything David Fincher makes. I'll still see anything Martin Scorsese makes. There are not a lot of new visionary filmmakers because they're not allowed to develop and grow. You know, if out of the gate you don't make a massive hit or something cool on the indie circuit, then you don't get a chance to do other movies. And I think we're doing ourselves a disservice. It's a bummer. I think you're absolutely right. We are failing to foster look. The reason why so many people don't get into Hollywood is because it's really fucking hard, and it'll destroy anybody. It doesn't matter. I mean, it's black, white, straight, gay, pink, polka dotted, wherever you're from, it doesn't matter. Hollywood will destroy you. It's just a really, really hard, awful business. Especially, it's harder and more awful than ever before to try and break in and then keep a career going. It's really, 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 really hard. So, yeah. Lieutenant Commander Slinga is back and says Hollywood seems to be in a phase of historicism. Historicism, like Europe in the early 20th century regarding art and design. Wikipedia. It comprises artistic styles that draw their inspiration from recreating historic styles or imitating the work of historic artisans. You know what? I wish that were the case because some of my favorite filmmakers, we talked about Ozu earlier. I would love to see more movies. I would love to see Hollywood go back and start recreating. Where's the Tarkovsky today? Nobody would watch that, but where is it? Or where is the Antonioni? You know, where is Godard? Where is Fellini? You know, where are all these people? And I would love to see more of that. I mean, maybe I wouldn't call it artistic styles because I think what's happening to what we are seeing movies being turned into these homogenized works that follow the same patterns and look the same way and have all the same beats. And I think it sucks. Mike Castro says, 1, it's hard to take the article author seriously when they summarize the Ghostbusters 2016 backlash as misogyny, Of course, some existed. It's the internet, but that framing tells me more about the author's politics than anything else. And while I agree with Red Letter Media on the problem with the overall nostalgia trend, the onslaught of articles complaining about it seem like journalists getting back at the fans they deem misogynists. Ghostbusters 2016 was more superficially nostalgia-driven all the way down to redoing the same general plot. Also, I ain't afraid of no ghosts. It offered nothing new and just reinterpreted the genre of comedy as slapstick, joke-a-minute improv comedy. Also, this is Mike continuing to go on, it's very telling that this is the line of attack by journalists. They seem to only care about overdoing nostalgia when they see the film as the enemy of the anointed feminist masterpiece that was Ghostbusters 2016. Well, here's what I would say about that. I think that you hit the nail on the head when you say that the problem with Ghostbusters 2016 was that it offered nothing new and just reinterpreted the genre of comedy as slapstick, joke-a-minute improv comedy. That to me is you're nailing it on the head. That was my problem with Ghostbusters 2016. Not that it had women in it. As a matter of fact, I mean, I would rather have seen them embrace more of the feminine or feminist aspects of the characters. I mean, what is it? You know, to me, here's what I find interesting. This is from my own perspective. One of the things that I've always appreciated about working with women in the film business is that women, by definition, or in my personal experience, women are more pragmatic about day-to-day life than men are. And when you are making a movie, this isn't to say that men aren't pragmatic either, but women, I like working with women producers because women are very detail-oriented and pragmatic about what you're trying to accomplish and what it is we can do. This isn't to say that men can't be that either, but I think that, you know, men tend to have pie in the sky. Like I got my head in the clouds, and I always like somebody, and I've worked with men who are like this as well. They bring your head out of the clouds and be like, okay, that's great, but how are we going to accomplish this? And I would like to have seen, I thought that Ghostbusters 2016 was far more cartoonish. I didn't believe those people. You know, it seems silly to say, but in Ghostbusters, I believed those characters more than I believed the characters in 2016, because, like you said, they felt real. Slapstick, joke-a-minute improv comedy is dead on. It didn't work for me. I don't like that kind of humor. I like character-based humor. But I do think that there has been, as a fan, I can tell you, and somebody who watches a lot of YouTube and being on shows, there have been a lot of people. There is a lot of misogyny in fan circles lately, but that is, I think, a response to the fact that we're getting all of these weird swapping of characters and things. It's odd. A lot of what's been going on is strange, and it feels forced. And I think it's not so much misogyny as it is this forced inclusion that is literally being pushed on all of us. It just feels weird. And I think that, look, if it came along with great stories, I don't think anybody would care. I don't think that anybody, I think that there's a lot less misogyny than people think there is. The problem is, look, I loved Aliens. When I saw Aliens when I was 12, or Alien, pardon me. When I saw Alien when I was 12, I never thought to myself, this movie has a girl protagonist, she survived, I don't like it. I loved it. I loved Sigourney Weaver as Ripley when she came back in '86 for Aliens. I don't think there was anybody that was going to go, I'm not going to go see this movie because there's a woman in the lead. No, it was great. I think people will watch anything if it's good. I don't think people care. I really don't think people care if you have a black protagonist, a female protagonist, a gay protagonist, a trans protagonist. I don't think anybody gives a fuck who the protagonist of a movie is if the movie's good. You can put anyone in the lead of a film and people will watch it. Any shape, size, color, creed. You got to make sure, though, that movie is good and the story is good. And the reason, I'd love to see some groundbreaking, dark cop thriller like Seven or something with a trans character as the lead detective. Wouldn't bother me the character's trans. Just tell me a good story. Make the character good. And maybe the fact that this person's trans gives them a unique perspective in solving the crime that a non-trans person, which means most of the population, wouldn't have. And maybe it's the transness of that character that gives them the edge, the expertise they need to find the killer or something else. I mean, I don't care. I don't think people really ultimately care who the protagonists of their stories are. They want the stories to be great and well written and serve the characters. That's it. And I honestly believe anybody will watch any story about any character as long as it's good. And that's what people want. That's what I want. Give me a good story. I don't care who the protagonist is. Just make me love that protagonist, no matter who they are. And I remember seeing the first trans character that I watched in a movie was John Lithgow in World According to Garp, and I love that character. And I know nowadays people say, well, they needed to get a real trans woman to play that character, but John Lithgow at the time, and I'll never forget. There's a certain mishap that happens, and John Lithgow says, "I had mine surgically removed, but to have it bitten off." I remember, I don't know why, almost 40 years later, I remember that line. I love that character. He was great. Actually, in the movie, Lithgow was great. The character was a great character. She was a great character. Lithgow, he did a great job playing her. So, I love that character. But look, if you want to make a religious zealot, I'm not a big fan of fundamentalist religious figures. If you want to make a religious zealot the lead actor in a story, make the story good, I'll watch it. I'm not going to be like, I'm not going to watch a movie about a religious zealot. I will if you make the religious zealot interesting. Be awesome. Lieutenant Commander Salinga sends in a tip and says, something crazy about warp travel. It would enable you to look into your own past. Warp from Earth to Mars and look back at Earth via a telescope. You see yourself shuttling to your ship and then your own ship travel towards yourself. Well, theoretically, plotting a course for warp speed means extrapolating the positions of planets and stars you see at your point in space into your future, layered regarding their distance from you. During warp, in front of you, time speeds up. Behind you, it goes backwards. Mind blown. It's true. I mean, they don't always do that. Lieutenant Commander Salinga goes on to say, if the USS Voyager could see Earth from the Delta Quadrant via a telescope, it would see Earth 70,000 years ago, over 67,000 years before Christ. Earth would see Kronos or Vulcan as the planets were far into their past and vice versa. That's absolutely true. Yep. I mean, obviously, all the starlight that we see from the stars in the sky are thousands of years old. We're seeing stars as they existed thousands of years, if not millions, or if not billions of years ago. That is absolutely true. That is absolutely true. That's what's amazing about the universe. Benson sends in a super chat and says, hey, Rob, what are your thoughts on the ridiculous arguments over the Scheider turkey photo? I feel the Scheider fans will never let the universe die. Oh, I didn't see the Scheider turkey photo. Here's what I don't get. The universe is continuing. I mean, the Snyderverse, we're talking about Snyder himself directing, but his Flash, his Aquaman, his Batman, hopefully his Superman, they're all continuing. So the Snyderverse continues to move forward, really, if you want to think of it that way. Now, his take on Justice League probably won't, but the Snyderverse continues, at least in my mind, because the people he cast, all of it, Wonder Woman, too. So you've got 2 Aquaman movies, 2 Wonder Woman movies, a Flashpoint movie with Ben Affleck and Ezra Miller's Flash. So the Snyderverse is continuing. It's just not continuing in perhaps the way they might want it to. So I like it. Science and Reason Lovers. Science and Reason Lovers said, you've mentioned Diane Duane's Star Trek novels, which I haven't read yet. Did you ever read her Young Wizard series? I did not. I love how she mixes science and magic. Talk about an author who knows her stuff. By the way, this week I will be dropping my 2-year-old interview with Diane Duane, celebrating the release of Star Trek Coda. So that's pretty exciting. I haven't read those books, but her Star Trek novels are incredible. If you want to read The Wounded Sky, read My Enemy, My Ally, and actually all of her Rahansu books. Because Diane Duane, here's what I love about Star Trek writers. This is why I like them. So Diane Duane, this seems like such a simple thing, but it shows the difference between Star Trek writers. So in Diane Duane's books, when she brought back the Romulan commander for from the Enterprise incident. She, like we Earthers, we us in the Star Trek universe, we call them the Romulans. That's the name we gave them. But in reality, the Romulans don't call themselves Romulans. They call themselves the Rahansu. And we turned it into that. Now, I always thought that was cool. I love the fact, to me, the Romulans, in my mind, my headcanon, Rahansu is the name of the Romulan race, according to them. So I thought that was good. She knows her stuff. She's great. And read Spock's World. Another good one. Our friend Alexander Wilson says, the letter from the person with cerebral palsy really hit me. I had a friend in college who was paralyzed from the waist down and used a wheelchair. One day he asked me to accompany him to the post office. I'm like, sure. We got to the post office. I realized there wasn't a ramp or a way for a person to access the post office in a wheelchair. He wanted me to accompany him so I could pick up his mail. Those are the little things that people take for granted. I completely agree. I mean, when I had a roommate with CP, it was very illuminating. It was very, very eye-opening. And I don't necessarily wouldn't want anyone to deal with that, but you know, Brian was the guy's name, and you know, he worked his ass off, and I had great respect and admiration for him. Torrin Atkinson says, do you feel the guest appearances, the Deus ex machina, if you will, at the climax of Afterlife undercut the main character's agency? I love the Ghostbusters, especially the cartoon, but stories should take precedence. I do. I thought it was kind of, look, we all know it was going to happen, but I thought it did take away their agency. I love that, a Deus ex machina instead of Deus ex machina. I love that, Deus ex machina. You're absolutely right, and I did think it was. I mean, yeah, it was again, it was fan service and nostalgia, and it's fine. But I you know, was that the story that they were telling? What's the lesson of that? I don't know. Caney Games Center says, hello, Rob, all the way from Switzerland. I just want to say hi and keep up the good work. Well, Caney Games Center, I'm a big fan. I was in Switzerland, how long ago? 16 years ago? I went to Davos and for 10 days. And I went skiing. I loved it. And then we went to Zurich for New Year's Eve, and it was awesome. I had a great time. Cyber Shaman, or Cyber Shaman X, says, my Star Trek Coda Book 3 arrives tomorrow. So does mine. I'm both looking forward to and kind of dreading it. Live long and prosper, Classic Trek. I have been and always shall be your friend. You too, Rob. Well, Cyber Shaman X, I can't wait to read Coda. I know it's going to be very bittersweet because there's no way they have to destroy their own universe. There's no way it can endure. I don't know how they're going to do that or what's going to happen, but it is the last Star Trek book I'm ever going to buy that isn't a reference book about the series. I'm not going to buy. My days of buying Star Trek novels are over. Unless, you know what, I shouldn't say that. Never say never again. Maybe I won't, but it's going to have to be a great story. Stub McShave says, I got Springsteen's No Nukes concert Blu-ray from 1979. It's a highly energetic performance with the boss at his best. It's only a 90-minute long show, which is less than half of what he usually did. It's great. I highly recommend it. I've seen Bruce Springsteen twice, and both times he played for over 4 hours. It was amazing. Human Kirk sends in two super chats. To your question, is not exploitation of nostalgia killing cinema? The abomination of Jar Jar Trek 2009 was for people who hated Trek. Rather, it is corporatization. Exploiting franchises equals risk minimization, and the current political climate killing Hollywood. I agree. Yeah, it is. It is corporatization. It's because movies. It's the ultimate example. Movies used to be a collision of art and commerce. Now the art's almost all gone. I mean, you still need to know how to make movies, but in terms of the art, it's all commerce now. All of it's commerce. So no longer is it the collision. It's just become all commerce. Terrier, all the way from Norway, says, hey, R&B, Twinkie or Ho-Ho? Ooh. I used to like unrolling Ho-Hos. That's a tough one. I'm a fan. I'm probably going to go with ho-hos because when I was a kid, I liked the fact they came wrapped in foil, and I liked kind of unfurling them. So I'm probably going to go ho-ho, but I'm a Twinkie fan. Human Kirk says Hong Kong Free Press reports that Disney Plus is now censoring entire Simpsons episodes that displease the party. Perfect example of corporate risk minimization. Yep, I've read that as well. Disney Plus, they took out a Tiananmen Square joke out of a thing, and to me, you know what? This is the beginning of the end. We're capitulating to an autocracy or a fascist. Not I shouldn't say fascist, but a dictatorship. All for money. And it's not. Remember, that's where we're going. There's a reason why in the Firefly universe everyone spoke Chinese, and we should get used to it. Human Kirk sends in a super chat again and says, homogenized Hollywood is basically what corporate art looks like. Corporations can make planes, trains, automobiles, but can't do art. I totally agree. Art is antithetical to what corporations need. Now, corporations, if they see that an art form can be very lucrative, such as movie making can be, when it hits, they'll try and, but it ultimately is not going to work forever, because ultimately what makes great stories, corporations want to quantify everything. Here's the difference. Like I've always told people, when you're trying to raise money, like if I were to come to all of you and say, look, I'm going to start a GoFundMe campaign. I've got a $500,000 movie I want to make, and I want you all to donate to my movie. And not donate, but you're all. Let's say I'm going to make you partners. You know, if we're going to see you. It's like you're buying into a, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, and I think of it as a stock option or whatever you want to call it. So you know that you want to get a return. The first thing I'm going to have to tell all of you is I can't guarantee you a return. I can't guarantee you, as much as I want to, I got to be honest. I cannot guarantee you a return for your money, because you can't. There's no way to quantify it. Now, if I wanted to start a apartment complex down the street, and I would say, hey, so here's how the rent goes. You'd look at here's the apartment complex. It's going to cost $5 million to build. This is the square footage. This is how much we're going to rent it for. This is how many apartments we're going to have. It's going to be mixed use. So the first floor is going to be retail space or whatever. I could tell you exactly how much money you're going to make back. Exactly in the amount of time. You can't do that with movies. So it's tough. And that's the problem. Corporations want to know how much money we're going to make. Well, it's hard to quantify. We can give you like-minded movies. Yeah, but how much are we going to make for this movie? You can't really ever tell. So what corporations want to do is minimize their risk. They're like, well, like-minded movies have all of these elements. We have to put all of these elements in the movie, as if you just throw them in and it'll work. And as you know, that's not the way art works. So it's a bummer. Mike Castro goes on to say, I think my question then is, where were the misogynists review bombing the movie, Ghostbusters Afterlife, when half the new Ghostbusters in the movie are girls? There were none. It has a 96% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes. It seems more like the big negative fan reactions directly correspond with whether or not fans like the movie, not the gender of the leads. I agree with that. But you know what? Ghostbusters 09, Ghostbusters 2016. Oh, there's no Ghostbusters 09. Ghostbusters 2016, you can't get away from the idea. It did feel pandering. It's like, well, we're just going to flip that switch. And I'm like, I have no problem seeing gender. If you want to flip the switch and give us an all-female Ghostbusters or give us an all-gay Ghostbusters, I don't care. Make the story good. Make the story good. I thought that the humor was sophomoric. I didn't like you pointed out, I didn't like the kind of humor in it. I don't think it was as character-based. It seemed like the characters themselves were cliche. I'm not a big fan of Leslie Jones going over the top, even though she did some funny stuff. And Chris Hemsworth was pretty funny. But I just thought that the movie was not as good as it should have been. So, which is a bummer. Plethora 1C says, I saw Afterlife and it was just sad. The ending is pathetic and makes me realize that no one in Hollywood understands what made Ghostbusters 1 so genius. I agree. I don't think many people do. Just having the Ghostbusters, let's just say the end of the movie, I don't want to spoil it. You can probably guess. Sorry. It's not... it's the characters that made Ghostbusters and the situations and how the characters related to the situations that made it funny. The idea that ghosts are real, and that these characters that they've never seen real ghosts, even though they believe in the supernatural, and that you have Bill Murray who's kind of along for the ride. You got Egon and Spangler. It's very funny. It was very funny, and it's all character. It's situational character-based humor. It's my favorite kind of humor. You know, the whole thing about, are you a god? No. Then die. And Zeddemore saying, next time someone asks you if you're a god, you say yes. It's both absurd, smart, and hilarious all at the same time. And that's why Ghostbusters worked. And that's a hard thing to do. And on that note, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, gentle being kind souls, what a show this has been, mostly because you've written great letters. I want to thank all of you for being here. I want to thank anyone who sends in letters. If you want to send me letters, you can send them to me at the Burnettwork.net, the website. I want to thank everybody for giving me tips and super chats and supporting the channel in that way and becoming members of the channel. This week, we will be having another members call. The Hollywood Half and Half will come back tomorrow at 8 a.m. with all kinds of new entertainment news. So there you go. And yeah. So remember, every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear. And all you have to do is listen. And with that, I would say to everyone, all of you out there, have a better day. Oh, wait a minute. You know what I forgot to do? I forgot to thank my moderators. I want to thank my Blue Wrenches. I want to thank Louise X. Sparrow. I want to thank Darren Seeley. I want to thank Joshua Levesque for all of you for being great moderators. I knew I forgot something, but since I haven't turned off the stream yet, I can thank you. So, thank you. I appreciate that. You're great moderators. And on that note, I can also say, finally, for real, have a better day and a good evening.